Kelly, welcome
Hi.
to the Car Bar. Again, the Car Bar being a place where real car people talk about real issues, escape the hype, if you will, in the car business. This is one of those episodes, Kelly, that I don't know where this is going to go. I do the research. I'm going to hand it over to Dale in a second to do a more formal, friendly invitation, since this is the first time that we've met. But from the automotive industry, from, again, to the reinsurance side of things, going to the investment side of things, the entrepreneur side of things, the women in automotive side of things, the associate producer side of things, the healthcare side of things. Dale, this could go literally anywhere.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm blessed that I get to be the person to sit in on this interview.
Absolutely.
Steve tried to fight me for it. I wouldn't let him win. But yeah, Kelly has been a part of my life for a better part of 14 years. A very big piece. She has inspired me in ways, to be a better person, be a better leader. She is a true beacon in this industry. She has shown me so many different things. She's taken time out. She is the busiest person you will ever meet. So we are blessed to have her in St. Louis.
I mean, that brief resume, I couldn't imagine there's a lot of time in between there. So.
Yeah. She just said she was on a 6-month hiatus, but she's stir crazy and probably walking in circles, driving her husband nuts. But she's done mentorship for me. She led me in a mastermind. She has talked me through tough times. And she just inspires me, and so we're very lucky to have her. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, Dale.
Well, Kelly, I'm going to touch on a couple things. I'm going to touch on, obviously, starting out on the actual retail side of things in automotive operations. I want to, and our conversations are going to take us through the origination of NAE, the merger and or acquisition of NAE. We're going to talk about the associate producing of a couple movies that I know of. I want you to expand on that because I'm not sure if there are ones that I missed on my research. And again, the PE firms, the healthcare side of things. Kelly, I'm super excited. And again, this is not going to be a 4-hour podcast, but I fear that it could go there if we allow it to. But take me back to, I hesitate to use the year, but take us back to Sunnyside. Is it Sunnyside Automotive?
Yeah,
is that where you started in automotive?
Yeah.
Could I take it one step further?
Yeah.
This is all about inspiring people.
Yeah.
So could you take it a step further? Because I learned this about Kelly through Cliff, that there's a lot of people that find their way into the automotive industry with no clear path on where they're going with this. How did you find your way into the automotive industry? Like prior to that, what were you up to?
Well, my dad was in the RV industry early in my life. So I spent my young years traveling around RV lots, pretending that I was selling, listening to, things going on. We'd go to the RV lot with Dad on the weekends and that type of thing. But later in life, and I say later in life, meaning like 18, 19, I got into real estate. I sold real estate for a short period of time. And my dad had called me. I was up in Michigan at the time. I was raised in Arizona, and said, I'd like for you to come back to Arizona and run my RV dealership. And I said, oh, Dad, I'm selling real estate. I own my own house. My husband and I have our own business. And he's like, well, I really think this is a great opportunity for you. So we sold our house. We shut down our business, sold the business, shut down my real estate, packed everything up. And the night before we were leaving to drive our stuff to Arizona, he called me and said, I just need you to know I sold my dealership. And so I was like, okay. And I was like, literally, we have no house, we have no jobs, we have no anything. And he's like, and I will say probably at the time it was a good thing to do. Arizona was in a much of a downturn. And I think God has a plan for everything, so that was probably the best thing, is to not be there. But my mom was in Cleveland, and at that time, we didn't have cell phones. You didn't just jump on a plane and fly to St. Louis for a podcast. Like, it just was a lot different. And so she had called me, and she lived in Cleveland, and she said, on your way to Arizona tomorrow, I know it's out of the way, but could you stop by Cleveland? I don't know when I'll see you again. And I said, I actually don't have any idea what we're doing. Dad sold the dealership. I went out, started to apply for jobs today. She's like, why don't you move to Cleveland? And I said, hey, you want to move to Cleveland? My husband said, sure. And so the next day we moved to Cleveland. And so I went right away and got a job waitressing and started at TGI Fridays. And I was on the lunch shift, and they had a wine competition, who could sell the most bottles of wine. I knew nothing about wine, but we could win a free lunch. And so I sold the most bottles of wine. And one of the tables that I sold wine to said, you're really in the wrong business. What you should be is in car sales. And I said, oh, no. I need to make a solid income. My husband's going back to school. And they're like, you'll make more doing that than you're waitressing. And a couple of my counterparts waitressing had just went to Sunnyside and got training. And they had a 3-week-long training program to take you start to finish and how to sell cars. I mean, they really did a very nice job. And everybody said, just go to Sunnyside, get trained, and then you can go to any dealership you want. You'll never stay there. You'll just go there. And so I started there, and I met my dear mentor friend. We've been friends since the day he hired me, Mike Kuva. And we started, I got on sales. I sold with him. Within 3 or 4 months, I was like, there's got to be a way that you can learn how to transition something to the F&I office. And so I started writing a training thing on how you would transition from sales to F&I, so that then when they trained in the sales in the sales training, that they would know this is a better way that we would know how. And they were like, well, we'd like you to go into F&I. So I had only been in sales maybe 4 or 5 months, but I'd been salesperson of the month, my very first month on the floor. And I remember one of the top salespeople saying, just so you know, you can never be salesperson of the month your first month. And I went to Mike and I said, Mike, they told me that I can't be salesperson of the month the first month. And I said, how is it that it was a motivator board? It had gross and F&I income and all of that type of stuff, all by little magnets at the time, no digital anything. And I said, how come I can't be sales? He's like, well, you can. He goes, and I said, well, tell me how it works. He goes, I don't want you to know how it works. What I want you to do is follow the 10 steps to the sale. And if you do everything right, the end will produce itself. And I'm like, okay. So I did everything like I was supposed to, and I was salesperson of the month and continued that way. But I became a major student of the business. I wanted to know everything. I wanted to understand, how the finance office works, how I could TO to the finance office a little bit better. And so about 5 months in, we were with Pat Ryan and Associates, and that was one of 2 people you could be with an F&I back then, and you had 3 products to sell: credit, life, disability, and service contract. That was it.
Right.
And so I went to Pat Ryan and Associates for training. And they came in and gave me a crash course because somebody left the dealership and they needed somebody immediately at the Hyundai store. And so they gave me a crash course for 1 day on the frequency of repair presentation in F&I and how to present it in, the service contract through a frequency of repair, bell curve and, all that, drawing it on a piece of paper. And so they send me in on my first deal. I get obliterated. I come out crying, and I'm like, this is not for me. I'm not doing this. And they're like, back in you go. And they just kept sending me back in. And the Pat Ryan guy, I won't mention the name, but I still know him today, but he'd send me back in. And then a day and a half in, they moved me to the Hyundai store. I'm there by myself. And they had never sold more than 30 Hyundais in a month. And the first month I'm over there, the F&I managers are calling me. They're like, how are you doing? You hanging in there? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, how many have you done? I'm like, 55. And they're like, 55? We haven't done 55 sales. And so I ended up being just crashed into this. And so I went to our owner at the time, our general manager at the time, and I said, if I'm going to do this, I want to understand what happens. I had read the front and back of every contract. And I said, I want to go sit at Pat Ryan, and I want to learn from them in an in-class, but I also want to understand what happens in the claims side, because I wanted to understand what was happening with our customers. And so anyway, time goes on. I get to do all of that, and I really became very interested in helping to do more with the finance managers. And so I wrote a finance training manual. Literally, I wrote, where it was name on the buyer's order, I had a number 1, and then I had a description. how should the name read for the salespeople? Like as you're filling out the handwritten buyers, and it was all. I still have the training manual today, but like, and they said, well, what we'd like you to do is to start training. I wrote a proposal in handwritten, and I took it and I faxed it to all the general managers of the 9 stores. We had dealerships in New Hampshire, Detroit, and Cleveland, and I faxed it to all of them, to their offices, with a proposal that I wanted to train all the F&I managers in help them in their thing. And so within a couple of years, I ended up being the finance director for all of the stores, and then I became vice president of finance over a period of time. And I just really got into the back end. And at the time, I would say, tell me a little bit about how the claims are going. Well, the reporting was about 18 months behind. And so I said, there's just got to be a better way. Like, how can you manage your claims 18 months in arrears? Like, you wouldn't even know. And I said to him, I really think I could do some of this for you. I said to our dealer, I said, I really think I could do some of this for you. We were writing a 3-month, 3,000-mile program and a 12-month, 12,000-mile certified program before certified was the thing through Pat Ryan. We were paying like $300 or $400 a contract. And I added it all up and I said, you know, how many claims have we paid this last year? Well, we won't know. And I said, you've got to know how many claims we paid. Like, give me the number. So it was like $3,000 in claims, and we had sent them like $40,000. And I said, I can do this for you, I promise. So I wrote the contract for the 3-3, 12-12, wrote the contract. I hired a gentleman to do the programming, to put the contracts in, which is still the programmer that resides at my previous company today, and started to write the program to be able to track all of these warranty claims. And then if the dealers internally had a claim, they would call me, I would evaluate it. And so basically we could retain that $40,000 a year, which at that time is probably worth what, $200,000 or $300,000 today,
Sure.
you know? And so we started that way. And then I'm like, you know, I started looking at other claims things, and I'm like, I really think we could do new cars as well, like new car service contracts. And you didn't have to have an A-rated carrier behind you. I was very blessed because the obstacles to getting into the industry today were not there. And so I wrote a contract for new car service contracts, opened up a phone line, opened up a company, you know, started doing that, and just for the dealer group at the time. And I really was it was pretty easy, but it was pretty easy because it was a new car service contract. I didn't get any calls for the first 2 or 3 years. And I just remember the first time we got a phone call, it was a white phone on our wall, and it had a cord. I mean, that was like, and it was a white phone on the wall. And when it rang, Rhonda, that was with me at the time, she ended up assisting me. And when it rang, I looked at her, and she goes, I'm not getting that. I'm like, I'm not getting that. Both of us were like, it's an outside phone call. I'm not taking it. And so we ended up obviously learning, you know, and you'd pull the phone over by your computer. And I mean, there were very few actual PCs in the dealership at the time. You just didn't have that. And email was really nothing.
Not a thing.
Yeah.
Not quite catching up.
Yeah. And so I just remember like really trying to figure it all out. You know, how can we do it right for the customer, making sure the customer was taken care of, making sure our finance managers had the right training. I actually had all of the deals come in to me. This is, I may take you back prior to Route 1 and all of that, you know, faxed in your deals. And so there was a company called Credit Connect that came out, and they were one of the first people that you'd input the deal and it would directly go to the bank. And I was like a beta tester for them because I said, I want to do this. But all the F&I managers would fax over all their deals to me, and then I would fax them and batch them to banks. And then I would get on the phone with a banker, and I would walk through all of the deals together. So I got deals bought that nobody else in the world could get bought because I would say, I'm going to give you these 40 deals from the weekend if you'll do, you know, these 2 deals. It doesn't work that way anymore. But at the time,
We sure wish it did.
Yeah.
Yeah, made things easier.
I think we came up in a similar time. Kelly, let's take a step back. I really want to unpack. You literally shift lanes, turn and go to a different town. What is the... And I want to touch on the fact that you say you were unencumbered to be able to start these companies, but also... We all know that timing is everything. That is certainly one thing, but I want to talk about, I want to explore What allowed you as a young retail pro, very green retail pro, what prepared you to be able to look at things the way that you did with, specifically even for the inputs versus outcomes road to the sale adoption? Like when your general manager said, just worry about doing this. How do you go from, let's call it a green pea, fresh salesperson to the floor, to be able to then wrap your arms around everything else for a specific dealer group? And what kind of time frame did that take place in? Like I'm enamored with that portion of it for sure.
Well, I will say this. I don't have a formal education, and I left school in my freshman year of high school. So I think and I moved out very young. I moved out my freshman year and lived on my own. And so I think that just like being a survivor, I don't know, you know what I mean? Like my family or my dad went through several marriages between the time that I was born and the time that I turned 13, 14, 15, 16, somewhere in there, but was on his fourth marriage by the time I was 16 years old. You know, so I think that I always say, like, your roots don't get strong as a tree if you don't have any storms come at you. You know, so there's a book, and I would recommend it to everybody. It just came out. It's called The Bravery Effect by Jill Schulman. And she talks about, and it's scientifically proven, that if a tree grows in a very protected environment, it may grow really fast tall, but as soon as you put it out into the environment of nature and replant that really tall tree and a storm comes, it breaks immediately because it has had no adversity to dig its roots deep and learn and grow. So I look back and I think, I mean, obviously I was just in survival mode, but I just was constantly surviving. I mean, I went to school, got my, cosmetology license at 16, then got into real estate. I mean, I just was like a survivor, but I grew up really, really fast. Like I had been working already since I was 13. And so I think just looking at things like, how do you make it work better, faster, easier? I don't know. I don't have any idea where it came from, but that's just how my mind works. Anything that I look at, I just look at it and think.
I think that's an amazing philosophy. Just the baseline of what you're, obviously with a tree without any adversity, it grows that way, but doesn't, it can get pushed over very easily, I think is an amazing baseline. I guess my question, and really where I want to get your take on it, to be that, okay, you're a woman in automotive, right, which at that time, and I came up,
was not good.
It just wasn't a thing. It certainly wasn't. It wasn't a thing. But to have the confidence, and without using any slang in this case, to have the confidence to be able to fax over to a bunch of GMs within an entire group to suggest, hey, I'm your person, and to do that in that period of time where you're younger, you're a woman, you're green to the industry.
I was like 21 or 22.
Yeah. I mean, it's extraordinary. I don't know what else to call it. And again, we are an automotive podcast. I mean,
you can say it. It's like just the balls
it's
to do
insane.
it. The balls to do it. Yeah, like to do it.
I was going to say the brass balls to be its compliment. But I
get
don't
to know where she's got. They're huge.
I hope, and I truly do, I hope that this is and starting on our podcast is an amazing way to start it, but people have to understand that contextually, the time frame that you were in to do this, that was impossible. I don't even want to say it was difficult. That was impossible. I was there.
Yeah.
I started in the 90s. Like, I know what this looked like. It was not a thing. And to be able to have the brass balls to go to your fellow GMs within an automotive group and suggest something to them, there's ego in the car business. I don't know if anybody knows this.
Well, yeah, and it was interesting because first of all, I was very blessed. So our founder, Tom Bolander, was an individual that opened up an Acura and Honda store in Detroit at a time that you didn't open anything. Yeah. And his whole mantra was, we are going to take care of the customer, which he called the guest, better than anybody else, and we're going to do it right. And so I learned very quickly by being at Sunnyside and through Mike Kuva and another gentleman, Steve Norris. Steve took me down to Disney School of Management, and we went to 3 different classes, 3 different times together to learn the best way to take care of a guest and how to pay attention to the details. So I always said to everybody, pay attention to the details, the rest will take care of itself. First lesson I learned the first month, but then when you go to Disney and you learn all of that, now I'm sure that that's changed dramatically, that school, but at the time it was like genuinely every single night they'd go through and walk the park to make sure that when that new person walked into the park for the first time, it looked like it had just opened the previous day. And so I went and wrote a culture training program based upon that for the dealership. This was before I became in charge of all F&I. Well, I was kind of running F&I, but also doing the training. I trained all salespeople, service advisors, receptionists, everything. And we wrote a culture training program that basically everybody would go through, and they still run this program today through the dealerships. And I took it into my business as well. And we wrote that training program in a way that everybody knew our mission, everybody knew our goals, and everybody knew how a customer, internal and external, were going to be treated. Because I think what is missed is everybody thinks the customer is actually the people on the outside, but the customer is you and I that work next to each other too. And how do we interact with each other in a way that we build that culture? So I think that having mentors and people like that, and then the person that ended up buying the dealership group, Kurt Fry, that still owns this. I mean, he sold off quite a few of his stores, but he's, I think, treasurer of NADA right now. But he really just said, I want to do it the right way. And he like empowered me. Like, I want you to succeed. What do you want to do to succeed? Like, what do you want? And so I think when you have leaders that don't have their ego attached to them, that want to see people grow. And he said, I may train you or you may grow to a point that you outgrow me someday, but my goal is to help you grow. So I think very early I had such great people around me that allowed me that opportunity. Now I will say I had people also around me that would say, oh, you must be sleeping with somebody. Oh, you know what I mean? This, or, that type of thing. Because you had that, like jealousy. From the outside looking in is a bunch of car salespeople in 9 stores. Like, why is she get to be F&I manager after 6 months? Why does she get to go to Disney training? You know what I mean? So, and Steve, I remember walking through Disney and he said, Kelly, I just want you to know being a leader is very lonely. And he said, so be prepared to be very lonely in this. And I am in a mastermind group with John Maxwell. There's 77 of us. He's 77 years old. He's going to be 78 next year. And he's taken 77 of us and he's introducing us to people that we couldn't meet on our own. But his mastermind next year is going to be about his loneliness as a leader. And he said, people ask me to write about my autobiography. And he goes, I'm not going to make an autobiography, but what I am going to teach you 77, going to be 78 people next year, is the loneliness in leadership. They're all very high-level entrepreneurs. And another blessing, like being involved in like a group like that. So I think like sometimes you just have to put yourself out there and people kind of come around you, but you also have to look for the right 5 or 6 people around you that are going to build you and lead you. So I don't think I could have done it without the people around me. But when I sent that letter, all hell broke loose. I mean, I'm telling you, like people, F&I managers picked it up that were like, who the hell does she think she is? You know what I mean? Yeah. Even though it was addressed to the general manager, an F&I manager is the one pulling it off the fax machine. Well, so I mean, it wasn't an easy transition, let's just say. And nor was my offer accepted. I mean, it wasn't how I wrote it did not get accepted. And that's actually how I became the trainer. Is they're like, how about we make you the trainer of sales? You know what I mean? And I remember like standing in there teaching the 10 steps to the sale, and I was the only one with a PC in the building other than one other person. And I wrote the training manual. I still have it today at home, and I forgot. I didn't save it, and I had written like 18 pages or 19 pages typewritten, and the power went out, and then it was gone. Like, you learn a really tight lesson, put it on the disk. Like, you need to put it on the disk. It was like little floppy disks, and you could only put a little bit on each floppy disk at the time. But I wrote the training manual, and I was so enamored with the fonts that every single page had a different font. It's so ugly. It's like the ugliest thing.
Oh, come on. I think that's amazing. That's part of what what
The
shaped
creative
our
eye, trying to
PC
figure out
world,
what you
right?
liked.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think just having somebody that would allow me to do that, even though what I wrote to the GMs didn't end up coming to fruition, but I became the finance director in the Ohio stores and then the trainer and, things like that. But also our dealer group, every 6 months, pulled our entire management team out for 3 days and brought in trainers and leaders, and we'd do book studies and we would learn and lead, and so having that, like, be a student of the business all the time, be a student of personal growth. So I was reading John Maxwell books, years ago through our organization because, First Break All the Rules, like all the different books.
Right.
And so then we would hire outside trainers, and then our manager said, why don't you just train the books? So I would spend hours taking a book and making training material, hours and hours for this meeting that we would lead, 100 plus managers in leadership training. And so I just was always taught that, like, just keep looking, keep growing.
I really want to frame this thing for our listeners more than anything. This is a time where those particular dealer groups didn't exist. Those
No.
advanced thinking leaders in automotive were not there.
Right.
I have a very similar story with the Rydell organization, but I met the Rydell organization in 2010.
Right.
I was in my career for years, and,
Right.
and we read The Goal. We were assigned reading The Goal by Elijah Goldratt. We did the Disney training, the onstage versus backstage kind of concept, which I still train to this day to a lot of our dealer partners. We read the Arbinger Institute. We read a lot of these things and grew because it was our own, I guess, brain trust in Grand Forks, North Dakota, at the launching pad for all the Rydell stores. This is what we did. But I came to that super late. You came to that in a time where it didn't exist.
Right.
Another unicorn, another, God wink, if you will, if you allow me that, to say, I work for the right group and my career is going to, everything you brought to the table plugged right in like that perfect fitting puzzle piece. But I want to stress how rare that was during that time. That was not a thing.
No.
And again, I can go back to the, young woman in automotive, the curmudgeon old sales managers. We complain to this day about, kind of that old school thought mentality. Well, that was a different old school thought mentality. Like, that was not an easy time to come up in the biz, if you will.
Well, I remember early on in the business, and you'll probably remember this, is we had surcharges on all the vehicles. Cost of doing business not reflected in the
Yes.
sticker price of the car. And so we were taught very quickly, like, there'd be an addendum on the car, and it was the base price plus $795 or $1,095 or whatever it was. And I was at a Honda store in 1990, so you figure, like, they were fire. Like, you couldn't do anything wrong. And on a Saturday, the dealership would just be lined all the way around the dealership floor with people waiting to be served. And as I was waiting for something, I'd walk by and say, somebody will be with you, somebody will be with you. And I remember some kids from a college, Asian kids, and they're like, well, we have cash with us, can we take delivery today? I'm like, actually, I'll take you right now. You know what I mean? Like, but you'd walk around, and I got so used to, I didn't even know. Like, people would say, do you guys have those surcharges? Oh, no, we don't have surcharges. And then they'd get there and you have a surcharge. I'm like, oh, no. That's the cost of doing business not reflected in the sticker price of the car. I was so naive. I just did exactly what they told me. Like, they gave me the words. I, like, regurgitated them.
There's some magic in that. For our young salespeople out there.
Just do what you're told. I mean, legally. But,
Sure.
it's just so funny because, even into finance, like, when I would present credit, life, and disability, I just printed up, put it in the agreement, and I'd walk through it. I disclosed it, but I did it exactly as Pat Ryan said. Just so you know, you're protected if anything happens, blah, 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 blah. I'd sell the service contract and preload the credit, life, and disability. And, at that time, being at $500 a car, like, our original owner, walked by and he said, you keep doing $500 a car, I'm buying you an Acura NSX. Like, because that was, like, big. You had
Right.
one contract to sell, other than rate and, reserve, which was much better than it is today. 'Cause
Much
you had a
better.
split.
Yeah, much better.
But, that was like a big deal to be at $500 a car at that time.
It's amazing. And again, I think we could do a series of podcasts just on this particular entry into your career and your resume. But I do want to explore and take that next step just due to time. I literally would love to spend 2 or 3 podcasts on that.
Quick takeaway from this is don't be a wallflower. If you see something that you think you can do better, no matter where you are in the chain of command, take a risk.
Even in life.
Put your name out there. Yeah.
In life, if you see somebody hurting, take the step and help them. You know what I mean? You can do it no matter what.
And I don't know that we've gotten better with that with the industry. I think there are other challenges within our industry, within the car biz, and life on the whole. It absolutely applies. But I think there are certain challenges that limit people from doing that to this day. It was different when you and I came up, when you came up, Dale, but now I think it's even more challenging. I
100% agree. I mean, I don't want to say timing was everything because you had to have the initiative, but there were certain things in place that allowed me to do things that I did that couldn't happen today. Like I couldn't write a new car service contract to a dealer and just start selling it. The lenders would never take it, right? You know what I mean? Like there's just a lot of things that just weren't in place at the time.
So let's transition into that. Let's talk about how that went from you suggesting, okay, Mr. Dealer, Mr. and Mrs. Dealer, I can do this for you for the entire group. We can retain more of the income. This is beneficial to you. Here's how. How does that evolve? You did suggest that, I'm making an assumption here, you were kind of playing somewhat both sides of the fence. You were an employee of the dealership, and yet you were the administrator. Mm-hmm. Tell me how that evolved into...
Yeah, so it was kind of funny because I would go to NADA and listen and learn and go to all the classes. And I went to a class on NADA 20 group. It was the 20 best ideas out of the NADA 20 group. And they were presenting those 20 best ideas from all the different groups that had, come together. And I loved every one of them. I'm like taking notes. I'm like so excited. And I go back to our general manager meeting and, I was part of that meeting each month. And I was like, this is this, this is this. And then all the GMs and my very, very, very dear friend Mike was sitting at the opposite end of the table. I can visualize it today. And I was telling them, like, this would be good, this would be good. And he said, listen, you little bitch, if you think you can run my effing store better than me, then you come do it, like that. And I was like, I just trying to give some ideas. So I had already been doing, like, some of the service contracts and that, and I had found an insurance company to insure us so that we could reinsure it. And, all of those things I had learned. I don't even know if I was doing it right, but we had done it. You know what I mean? And
let's not say that. Let's put it.
Yeah.
Well, even to think about like reinsurance and how
how different it is.
New and yeah.
So
go out and, like,
one way or another, I was doing it.
us.
Whether I was I mean, who knows if anybody would have come in and said, "Yeah, that's not right." But I was emulating what I thought was out there related to Pat Ryan and other things.
Those statute of limitations have all expired.
Yeah.
We're good to go. We're good to go for sure.
But I remember, and so I got in the car that night and I called Kurt and I said, Kurt, I can no longer be limited by the limited beliefs of your general managers. And I said, I don't want to leave you in what we're doing, but I'm going to open up my own administration company and do what I'm doing for you for other dealers. And I said, you can come along for the ride. You cannot. You can support me. You don't have to. I said, but I've been really talking with our insurer, and he thinks what I do, I could really do for a lot of other dealers, and the way that we do it and the transparency. And I said, and he's like, you have my blessing. And so that was the turning point of that day, is coming back from NADA and then having the general managers be like, we want nothing to do with any of your ideas. And it was really more because it was my idea. It wasn't because it wasn't a good idea.
Always is.
And nowadays we all laugh. I mean, I literally was at a wedding with all the same people sitting there for Kurt's son a couple months ago, and they're all like, we all knew eventually after you left, we're just going to end up working for you someday. We didn't. But, I mean, they still did their same thing. They're still general managers of the store, the same stores, some of them are retired, but they stayed doing the same thing, the same 100+ cars a month, living. And they had nice lives, and they did that. It just wasn't what I wanted to be able to do. I just felt like there was something bigger we could be doing. And, but anyway, so fast forward, I mean, I think that was really the impetus of what kind of started that. And so I just started going around and talking to people that were dealers in the area, doing some things. I started writing. Between that point, and the breaking point for me, I had gotten into used car warranties and some ancillaries and some things like that.
Sure.
So there was a couple year period, but the whole time start to finish of that breaking point was about 7 years in the industry.
And well, I don't know if you want to talk about that or not, but who underwrote that? Who was the person that literally saw in you and pushed you in that direction from the company that you had found to write your new car policy?
I just started asking people, like US Warranty was one, but they were really kind of doing what I was doing, and I was like, that doesn't really fit, you know,
Right.
that type of thing. So I found a risk retention group at the time that RRGs were very common, and then they weren't once Smart Choice kind of blew everything up. But I had set it up from the beginning, actually, because Smart Choice is I would take all the administration fee and reserve it and amortize it over the period of the contract, and take it in as income as the contract earned. So I really only spent the actual cash that we had that was earned cash. So I earned it like a service contract.
Right.
And a lot of administrators, and maybe still today, will take that admin fee and assume it's their income today and spend it, you know. And I remember being at NADA and F&I, the F&I conference was very young at that time, maybe not even for the first couple of years, but at NADA, and like administrators were flying around on jets and doing things, and even one in local Cleveland, and as soon as the economy crashed, they'd either lay off their claims administrators or lay off, but those are actually, you've written all the contracts, you better have your team in place at that time. You can't let them go when all the contracts are at their high claims point. But what did you do with all that other money? And, you know, so as they were all flying around in their jets and doing that, I was like, there's not that much money in this industry to be able to do that if you're amortizing out your admin fee, you know, to hold it. So we ran as a debt-free company the entire time I owned it. We never had any debt, and we maintained that same reinsurance type idea of keeping your claims in a different account to be able to do it, because I didn't ever want to be that person that couldn't afford to keep my claims people. When just because we're not selling cars doesn't mean that you're not getting claims. They're not equal to each other. They're actually inverse of each other. The higher your contracts are that you write today, the more claims people you're going to need in 5 years, regardless of whether we sell a car or not. Like, we have to have that money sitting there.
So
Is that
again,
the
go ahead,
birth
Dan.
of NAE as the contract, NWAN as the administrative
Yep.
piece of that? You could just
Yep, that was the
separate church and
yeah.
state.
So as we brought it in, there was an admin fee that we took in up front that was kind of our marketing and admin fee, and then there was the part that we amortized over the thing. And so we had a marketing company and National Automotive Experts, and then an administration company and NWAN, you know, over that. And so that all happened much closer to like the 2006, 2007 when we came out with Warranty Forever. You know, that was kind of like the really next big boost, because before that it was just most local dealers and things like that, and people I could touch and see. So
I'll add some context too. So that was 06, you said? Mm-hmm. So that was even prior to the bankruptcies during 08,
Right.
and when dealers were actually getting lean. So you made a couple comments earlier, and I don't want to gloss over any of this, and I do want to shed light on the growth curve to this. The learning curve that you've adopted with all of this is extraordinary. Again, it's separate podcast altogether. We'll fly to you. So, but I want to touch on a couple things, and again, it's in that theme of debt free, right? Running lean, running smart, doing things, and having that perspective of not operating like the other big houses were, the big boxes that we all know and somewhat love. So, shouldn't say that in my position, but with that being said, you made a comment earlier that you were in Michigan, your husband, you were going to send him back to school, in your house, you owned your house. So I get a theme, and kind of that theme from starting working at 13, Kelly, and I'll pay you this compliment. We'll hand you this rose for sure. Did this whole mindset that you had, kind of this, I attribute it to kind of that adversity mindset that we talked about earlier as well with the tree reference, but it's that Eastern Bloc Europe boxer that grew up in the mountains, you know, fighting bears, that comes out and all of a sudden becomes a world champion. Like, I really want to get to the point where I want to get to the question and see how this affects your evolution. If you started with nothing, and literally was scratching and hustling to get everything. We've already established the brass balls, right, as Dale so lovingly called them. Was that a central theme to your growth with the limited debt, just scratching for everything, being smart with everything? And is that literally the entire system you layered over your growth?
Yeah, I don't think I was as good personally with money. What I did is I used 0% credit cards very, very well. So I would take the 0%, and then when that would run out, I would flip it to some on a personal level. So I don't think that I was as good early on financially. I never missed a payment. And I had a very big lesson at 18 years old. Before I left Arizona, my Nissan financed me for a brand new car. I don't know how. Like, some salesperson batched me with a bunch of contracts.
Yeah, I was just going to say. Some finance director somewhere said,
it was like,
you'll take Kelly if you get all of these.
Right. And so I had an old 1988 or 78 Delta 88 Oldsmobile that was, I mean, the biggest tank in the world. They gave me $1,000 like down payment towards my car. But when I came home with that car, it was like one of those big dirt lot sales. They brought out all the cars in Arizona to like a dirt lot, a big tent sale. And so I took delivery out there. And when I came home, my uncle said to me, he said, I'm just going to tell you right now, Kelly. He said, you can have anything you want in life as long as you pay your bills and your credit is good. He's like, you'll never want for anything if you never miss a payment. And so that right there, I was like, I'm never missing a payment. So no matter what I did, how I had to scrap to get to pay my bills, I always paid my bills. Now, when we're talking like credit card debt, at the time it felt like a lot, like 20 grand. You know what I mean? Nowadays, like people, I can't even imagine.
We're not going to go down that path.
We're not going to go down that path. But, so for me, I would roll this same like $20,000 over on these interest-free credit cards. As soon as one would expire, I'd go apply for another and I'd roll it to them. And, my credit was good. I always paid my bills. Got a house. I always paid my house payment, that type of thing. So I think like logically, I knew I needed to always pay my bills and make enough money to pay my bills. So I don't think I ever got overextended. Were there some tougher times? Absolutely. But in a business setting, again, being very lucky, having Kurt as kind of like my cheerleader behind the scenes. If I needed $20,000 to make payroll this week, but I knew it was coming in next week, he would give me the money for 2 days and then I would pay him back. So, like I had like that almost like a home equity line sitting behind me in my business early on. It allowed me to be very brave with hiring people much bigger than I could actually afford at the time. And so bringing in bigger people, because I didn't deal with agents. I went direct to the administrator. I never wanted a rep or an agent in my store. Now that I look at it, Pat Ryan's employees were technically their agents.
Sure.
Like I get it, yeah. But I never had that relationship. So I didn't know agents. When we went out with Warranty Forever in 2006, I got like 104 phone calls in one day for our Warranty Forever ad on July 3rd, which happened to be a Monday. So if you look at July 2nd being a Sunday and July 4th being a Tuesday, for me to get, when you sent out an email in the early 90s or late 90s, it was like you had to read it. Like nowadays you're like, I haven't read my email, this week, but when you got an email blast from F&I magazine or whatever it was at the time, everybody read it. So I get 104 phone calls on that Monday that's a holiday weekend, and half of them were agents saying, I want your product. And I said, I don't deal with agents. I only deal direct to dealers. I don't have agent relationships. Then they would call pretending they were a dealer. And then,
sure.
And the next thing you know, I've been tricked into like a very large automotive group, because Jim Pauley was very persistent, imagine, you know what I mean? So anybody that knows Jim. And so he, but he was very also really like a good teacher. Like I listened to him, I learned, things. And then I hired somebody that actually knew agents. And I think but being able to hire that person and that bravery of putting out what would be big money at the time, it's not today, probably wouldn't even buy that person, but getting big money at the time and hiring before you desperately need it. And so I think being brave enough to look ahead and know where you're going and hire in advance of your needs. And so we tried to do that with every role in the company, like not when you were desperately needing it, but before you needed it, so you had time to train and coach and educate. And our management team, I would say, was probably one of the, and people have told me, the best management teams in the business, but everybody was hired before we actually were critically in need in like rebuilding, that. And so I think those brave times of kind of going ahead before you actually need it is a lesson that I would say anybody should do. Like if you think you're getting ready to burst at the seams and you're afraid to hire, because when you get to that next point, that person's now trained and you're elevating that much faster.
Scale is a tough one. That's another tough conversation. I want to touch on this word that you keep using, because I truly do. If it's not your mantra, if it's not a defining word, then I would be hard pressed to find another one for you. But this bravery word, how did you came from a good culture within the dealer operationally? You had a dealer that found value in growing people, which is huge and rare during that time. We've already touched on that. How did you translate your culture, and maybe even part of that word bravery? Where do you find that word? But how do you implement that into your culture within AE?
Yeah.
How did you take that and establish that with these good people you were getting?
Yeah, well, I think oftentimes they were definitely not as brave as me, but I just said, guys, we're doing it. Like, we're just going to have to dive in and don't be afraid to fail. Like, and this is where John Maxwell's books really came in for me, is Failing Forward. I don't remember if that's an actual title of a book. It might be. But Failing Forward for John was like one of the things that he is I said, if you try it and you fail, it's okay, but we're going to analyze it. What did we do right and what did we do wrong, so that our failure becomes a lesson. And I don't think you get anywhere without failing. Like, there are so many failures that I can tell you we had in our business. I mean, one of them I remember at my very first agent meeting, and we unveiled this product we were going to have. And next thing you know, all these agents in the room, this was my very first thing, came to me and said, just so you know, that product's actually illegal. And it was a safe break thing or whatever, the flashing lights. And so I literally was like, well, that was good. We just announced it at our very first agent meeting, and then we canned the product. And so I think you learn from things like that. But if you're so afraid to fail, you're never going to discover what actually works. And so I think just me not having that fear, and when your leader doesn't have the fear, I think it empowers other people to come to you with change, come to you with opportunity. But I mean, we would have those brainstorming meetings very frequently, and so they were used to thinking bigger, differently, you know what I mean? What can we do? And then learning, like, I mean, Warranty Forever, when I put it out, I had a 7-year, 100,000-mile program for quite a few years that we did, and it was a piece of paper, and it just was on dealer letterhead that said, we'll give you a 7-year, 100 powertrain warranty as long as you service with us. And they just signed it. And that was the warranty we had, which was very innovative for a Honda store, for a Toyota store, all of that, to have that inside of a dealership group. And then when Hyundai came out with their 10-year 100 and Mitsubishi, I was like, well, 700 doesn't sound so good anymore. Let's take the terms off of it, do a lifetime, call it Warranty Forever. And then I decided, well, we don't have to leave that just here at this dealership. Let's announce it to the world, which was great. And then Jim Pauly, I'm getting ready to launch, and he goes, that's against the Magnuson Moss Warranty Act. You can't tie somebody to the dealership. Well, I'd been doing it for years within the store. So immediately I was like, how could we do this? And we were like, well, if they have to call in and tell us where they go beforehand, and if they do that, they can go wherever they want. Well, that passed muster. I started going through it with attorneys. Yeah, that'll pass muster. Well, that really made the difference for Warranty Forever, because not only did somebody have to call in, but we knew when somebody was leaving, where they were going, why they were leaving. And so we became like a powerhouse for the dealers to say, you don't have enough hours open. Your car, it's too expensive. People aren't answering the phones. You have to wait 3 weeks for an appointment. So we could tell them all of that. So it
Operationally, the
became
trickle
like
down. Yeah.
this whole operational program that really came out of how do we get around this Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act of tying the customer back to the selling dealer. And so then we could, and you will know this from the early 90s, NADA said that if you service with the store, I don't know if this is so true today just because loyalty isn't there as much, but if you service with the store, that the person was 86% more likely to buy from you than if they didn't service as a store, about 14%. And so if I could keep that person there for that first service, they would generally service again. So our whole mantra for our pre-authorization team was get the person back in that first time. So we would convert about 50% of the people that would call in to say, I'm going to Jiffy Lube or I'm going somewhere else, back to the selling dealer by giving the benefits of going back to the selling dealer. And then the dealer would then have control of that customer. Now, if they couldn't keep control at that point, shame on them. But the whole idea is like, how much do you spend in remarketing that same customer that you don't have to spend? But again, I learned that all going back to learning to work the service drive and walking the service drive as a salesperson. And so those were all things that I had learned that you kind of reapply. But we took like a really negative thing in not being able to tie the customer back and actually made it the biggest selling feature of Warranty Forever. I mean,
that's amazing. Culture is everything. You talked about having your team there, which is, Dale, similar to our philosophies with Conley, is it being as transparent and having those conversations as you possibly can be. How difficult was that coming up? Again, we can pay the original dealer, Sunnyside, all the roses in the world. They were advanced in their thinking. They were obviously ongoing learning. They wanted to be kind of the tip of the spear for customer satisfaction, both internal and external, all those great things. But also there was a point where you hit a glass ceiling because you were sharing ideas and perspectives on things. How do you take that? And I'm kind of assuming the answer a little bit, but how do you take that learning opportunity? How do you take that challenge? And of course the transition was brilliant, but how do you take that and then impart the exact opposite into your organization as one of the key points to your culture? How do you do that?
Well, I think constant communication and being able and willing to really educate, train, and develop your people. And in the 15 laws of growth, there is a law of the lid. And basically, if you are not continuing to grow and somebody under you is growing, they're going to hit that lid. And they're going to be either become very, very frustrated and grow around you and probably take your position or do whatever, or they'll just leave you. And so everybody that really started with me went through the 15 laws of growth. And we did that intentionally because if they understood the 15 laws of growth, and if you haven't read the book, I'd say do it. But if you understood the 15 laws of growth, especially as a leader, and I always say you don't have to have a manager title to be a leader. You can be a leader yourself and not be in a leadership position. But if you are continuously growing, then as long as you're growing ahead of the people underneath you, then you're inspiring change. They're getting bigger. You're inspiring change. They're getting better. And so I think that was always in our company. I mean, we started with the culture training program of bringing people through our culture training program. We did monthly associate meetings. I mean, I would walk around with $100 bills. We had a lapel pin for our business. And I said, anywhere we go, somebody needs to know who we are just by looking at that pin. And so everybody had to wear them at the office and their name tag. And they needed to know their mission. And then they had to have our Credo card in. So we brought in the Ritz-Carlton. They talked to us about Credo cards, mission statements, that type of thing. And when we wrote our mission statement, we spent an entire day writing our mission statement, arguing over periods, the words, like where do things go? What words are we going to use? Because I felt like if our core team was there, and it wasn't just managers, but our core team was there, people that really lived and breathed our culture, they needed to believe in that. And so if they could believe in it, that it would infiltrate out to our team. And so we had people that knew you probably knew our model, people, products, performance, the way it should be. And we added in the way it should be after Ohio State, Ohio State, but the way it should be, because people have to come first. You have to develop a product that actually does what it says it does. So the performance. So people first, product second, performance third, the way it should be. And so we always developed our people. So in our associate meetings monthly, if somebody was walking down the hall, I'd say, tell us our mission statement. And our mission statement wasn't easy. It was 4 or 5 sentences. And I'd say, tell us our mission statement. And if they could tell it, I'd hand them $100.
Beautiful.
And then if they didn't have, and then we came up with pickle bucks from the pickle guy. You guys can look it up, but came up with pickle bucks, and you could earn pickle bucks by doing different things, going above and beyond, helping. And anybody could give them to anybody else. Like you could give a pickle buck, or what we called a happy gram away, which was a Disney thing, And so we would read those happy grams every single month at the associate meeting, and it was one person telling another person how above and beyond they went, and like continuing to develop the culture in the company. But again, it has to start from the top. If you aren't leading it and you're not doing it, it doesn't matter. Like if you're a lower level leader and trying to do it within your team, that's great. But if the teams around you aren't buying into that, it's a broken culture. So it has to start from the top, and it's a lot of work. It doesn't just happen. Like you have to really, really work at it. To walk down the hallway, be busy, and stop and say, thank you for wearing your lapel pin today. Here's a pickle buck, or that type of thing. I started with $100 bills to get the mission, and then after that I would hand out pickle bucks, and every manager would get X amount of pickle bucks to hand out per month. And the encouragement was cross team, like not just your team, like who else could you do that with? So developing that type of culture. And then our associate meetings, like everybody says they would run to our associate meetings. We'd walk in, we'd have music blaring, we'd high five people, we'd do, all kinds of things and laugh. But I was always myself. Like of course you have the script of what you're doing, but you never knew what was going to come out of my mouth. And I always say, I'm as transparent as they can be. Everybody knows who I am. I'm the same person, whether I'm sitting in front of you today or I'm somewhere else. I just, I'm an open book, and not perfect by any means, but just try to live the best and do the best for people that I could. But when people saw that, we had people make rap songs to our mission statement, and not only just our associates, but agents knew our motto, knew our tagline, knew our mission statement, because we talked about it everywhere. And if I was with a dealer ever and I would say, our mission is so important to us, and I would say let's just say there were 3 salespeople with me, I'd say, pull out the Credo card. Every single person had the Credo card on them. And, you could tell it was tattered and worn or whatever. And if a dealer asked for it, their responsibility is to get a new Credo card back in their wallet, just because it had our servicing standards on it. It had who we were, what we were going to do, our mission, our values. And so it was never not right in front of everybody, and including in all of our presentations. We would start our dealer presentation with our mission statement and our culture. And I think that that's something you don't get probably today. I'm not going to guess, but I don't know. Maybe there's people out there that still do something like that.
Kelly, you don't get this anytime. I don't want to keep laboring that point of how extraordinary this is, but to be a visionary in this industry the way that you were, and to be able to lead from the top the way that you did, deserves all the great words, all the great adjectives. It's very difficult, which is what, obviously why we're having this conversation today. I want to get this word out there. This part of it is as extraordinary as it gets. You don't create a cool company like that just by getting lucky. I throw that word out the window. I hate that word. I despise it. It doesn't make sense. It has nothing to do with what you do and what you've done. But I truly do want to know, because we touched on this a little bit earlier, as you scaled this business, as it became as it achieved its cultural peak, right? As it achieved its cool peak during all of this, there had to have been pains of scaling this. And bear in mind, Dale, and I know you know the timeline better than I do, of course, we're butting up against a merger coming in as well.
Yeah.
So talk about how you went from you being transparent, you being the face, the name, the voice, the culture, right? How did what challenges did you face as you got to that point into these years leading up to?
I think there were a couple pivotal points. Number one is like the 2006, 2007, right before the crash, 2008. I mean, and I just kept saying, guys, the good news is we don't have much to crash from. We're not big enough to, and we had been saving our money appropriately, and we'd been doing the right things. As everybody, I remember there were a couple administrators put out public announcements. We have reduced our claims staff 50%. We need to save money in this time. And I'm thinking, that is so not right. So at that time, we went 1 year, we doubled our business from 1 year to another. I want to say it was 10 to 11 or 11 to 12, somewhere in there. And so we had hired some new people, and all the people that had been there for a while didn't like these new people coming in. They were in their territory, that type of thing. And there was so much tension. So I took the book Ideal Team Player, by Patrick Lencioni. And if you haven't ever done that book, but we took every single exercise in that book and broke down all the different things of what was going on. And so I would say, what's your biggest challenge with every single manager in here? And we did it over a series of 5 or 6 months. And it says in there, you're most likely going to lose somebody in this process of going through, really breaking down culture and teamwork and creating a first team. And so I said, we have got to create a first team. We have doubled our business. We have to get on the same page. And it was painful. And I didn't do it all right, but we did end up losing somebody through that process, but they were also not going to be the person that took us to the next level. Gotcha. And so sometimes there's people that get you to one level, but can't get you to the next level. And I was actually listening to, I met with Kevin Turner, and if you guys know anything about him, he worked for Sam Walton directly and Bill Gates directly. So CEO of Microsoft, CEO of Sam's Club, but started as a bag boy at Walmart. And so we had the pleasure, John Maxwell introduced us to him in September, and he said, I re-interview every single one of my top line managers every single year. They know that their job is going to be re-interviewed for, because our company may have changed in a way that what you've done for us today is not what we need in the future. It doesn't mean you're bad, and it doesn't mean I don't have loyalty to you. It doesn't mean you may not have another position in our company, but I need to make sure I have the top people moving forward. And I think by doing that team building exercise and going through that and breaking down the walls of well, the thing that bothers me the most about you, Dale, is that I send you an email and you don't respond for 3 days. So you're saying that in front of all your teammates, and then all of a sudden everybody's like, I feel the same way about you, Dale. I just can't get a response from you. You know what I mean? And so having those candid conversations and getting them out in the open instead of all this infighting or maybe destructiveness within each other that isn't being talked about, having those, I'll go back to brave conversations, because it was brave at the time. I probably didn't use that word at the time, but candid conversations really allowed you to grow. So it was a very, very tough time. The second toughest time was we had a lot of direct business, because I started direct to the dealers.
Right.
So we had a lot of direct business, and then we had agents. And there was a very big conflict with agents, even though we would never, ever step over an agent in a deal. But the industry, the reputation was that an administrator would step over an agent in a deal and take the deal direct. And so I sold off our direct business to an agency, to Bob Mancuso. And so he went from being my right-hand person to being his own company. And it was a very challenging time, but it ended up being the best for both companies. So I had to downscale a part of my business and hand it off and cost ourselves money. And sometimes I think you have to give away something to go further. You know what I mean? And sometimes you find yourself in too many pieces of the puzzle. And so knowing what is it you're going to cut out to go further. And sometimes it's a product. Sometimes it's a state. You know what I mean? Sometimes, who knows what it is. But sometimes you just have to make some really tough decisions to make sure that you're growing the right way and having the confidence of your largest consumer, which were our agents at the time. We weren't doing a lot of direct marketing to dealers because our agents were doing that for us as we had gotten bigger. And I realized very quickly that the agent relationship with the dealership was much stronger than any product that I had. Very infrequently could I break through and replace the agency relationship. And so that ended up being very good for both Bob and his team and our team, because we both grew exponentially after that, but not and grew together, at the same time.
That's amazing. So you said a couple things there that I really want to unpack as well. I mean, the first part that I want to touch on is obviously having to make a difficult decision with an employee and suggesting, hey, I need to move on because you can't get me to that next level. That's an important, and all the time, not oftentimes, all the time, a very difficult decision to make. The other part of it that I want you to touch on, and I will come up with a question here, I promise, is the fact that how you do things got you to where you are, how you do things going, if you continue to do those things, it won't get you to where you want to be, oftentimes. My question is, in all of that, is there anything that you would have done differently during that period, those two tumult times that you touched on, whether it be bankruptcy and then, we're in the teens, I think, as far as years go, and your scaling and your growth?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think that never ever should an employee or one of your people that work for you be surprised by the outcome if you ask them to leave or to take a different position. So I did constant one-on-ones with everybody. There was never a time that there was going to be a surprise in either an employee evaluation or a termination. Like, there should never be a surprise. And if any manager came to me and said, I'm having trouble, and I said, if you went to them and said, this is your last day, is this going to be a surprise to them? Because if so, then you haven't done your job.
Yep.
And so I think a lot of times, and I would say that there were times that I felt maybe I had somebody that couldn't be replaced, or it would cause too much chaos either with an agent or with a client, that I held on to too long. And there are two people, I won't bring up names,
Sure,
that I definitely waited way too long. And even when we were getting ready to sell, David and I were sitting there talking, and I said, what, in your opinion, is your biggest failure or our biggest failure? And I said, let's both say what it was, and it was the same thing. And so both of us knew we had let it go too long and hadn't been brave just to cut the ties when we really had the absolute reason to, in the behavior, actually, at a client meeting. And that we should have just said, this is the time, and it would have been better for that person, and it would have been better for us. And then when that person left, it became very ugly within our company because we gave that person too much time to feed the cancer in the information into. And so I think for me is being a little braver. I was very loyal to people, and I think sometimes loyalty, you have to separate personal likes and dislikes for a person from their actual performance. And I think that sometimes I would want more for them than they would want for me, or that they would want for themselves, I should say. So a lot of times you try to grow a person more than they want it for themselves. And so recognizing that and knowing that you are the one that wants it more than they actually want it, and now is the time to re-interview that person for their position, as Kevin Turner said.
I think it's pretty extraordinary to say. And again, for all intents and purposes, NAE was a startup. I mean, we can liken it to, all the things that we see in, Microsoft starting in a garage, and those people that are early employees tend to become family. That's just the way it is. And I would assume, and again, I'm paying it as complimentary, your company, your culture, that probably made those decisions extremely difficult.
Yeah.
Like heart-wrenchingly difficult. Would you suggest, and again, we are butting up against the idea, and we've alluded to it, there was a merger, there was a sale of your company on the horizon. Before we get into that, because that's where we're going to go, and Dale, I'm going to ask you to touch on that in a second after this question, but because I want the agency's perspective at that time, how that looked, some of the fears, and it's going to obviously create some good dialogue. But I want to ask the question: what was the greatest selling point? Your perspective. I don't really care about the company who bought you. I don't want to know their reason for acquiring you. And I don't even want to narrow it down, but just a couple ideas is: were they buying you, the culture, the name, the face, the voice, everything that we discussed already, all the great things and that startup mentality? Or were they simply buying your book of business? Or were they buying your products? Or were they buying your infrastructure? Or were they buying your position with agents and deals? I'm going to give you all the multiple choices in the world, and it doesn't have to be any of those. Obviously, it could be a combination of all those things. But what made you so attractive to that major player in the industry?
Yeah, well, so when we started looking into it, what kind of prompted the whole thing is, as we know, regulatory and doing business in this industry has become very hard, unnecessarily so. I think with the help of maybe one or two companies, that doesn't have to be as hard as it is, but took advantage of it from a financial basis of kind of getting into the middle of it. And so as regulatory started to rise and the cost of business in each state, I remember we were doing business in Oklahoma because we were with a very large dealer group that had one store in Oklahoma. And we didn't have a lot of business in Oklahoma. There's not a lot of business to be had. I mean, maybe now a little bit more, but at the time. And our cost of doing business was triple to what we actually would bring in income. But I had 34 stores with this dealer group. Not doing business with one wasn't an option, right? So I always say, like, we became too big to be small and too small to be like super big and afford what was happening in our regulatory environment. And so a lot of administrators were spending so much money on things, and I'm like, there's just not that much money in this industry. Like, if you're reserving your money the way you should be to pay claims administer the contracts and do all of that. And I said to David and Andy at the time, I said, we need to investigate what is going on out there. Like, what's happening and where all this money is coming from, which we found out coming out of private equity, right? And so it allowed you, like, a bucket of money that people could bring in and allow you to do these things that I couldn't do as myself. And so although we were fine and successful the way we were being bumped up against competitive natures that we couldn't compete in. $5 million loans, $10 million. I mean, like, we just couldn't. We could give $1 million loan or $1.5 million loan, but we couldn't give a $5 or $10 or $15 million loan to a dealer.
Landscape, yeah.
I think everybody's kind of regretting where that went at this time because it's not paying off like it should have. But I think at the time. So I remember sitting down with our broker at the time, well, not the broker, but interviewing the broker and saying, we don't even know if we want to sell. We don't know if we want to sell a portion of the business to infiltrate some cash into it, to be able to do the dealer loans. We don't really know what we want to do, but we just want to understand how are these administrators doing what they're doing. But what we know is we don't want to be acquired by a company that's going to take us and piece us out and break the culture of what we've done. So we had a lot of offers in a lot of companies that probably would have paid more than we sold for. It took us 3 years to make a decision. And ultimately, when we sold the portfolio, the way we were sold was when you overlapped our two companies, we didn't compete in a lot of markets. Like, literally, it looked like we were filling in the holes, which was great. We had a claims administration company. They did not. So us having claims, they could bring some of their claims in-house. We could do that. And they wanted our culture. And so overlaying those two things, even though it was less of a financial win for us than maybe some others would be, we've thought and felt like it was the best opportunity for us to come together and maintain what we had. Unfortunately for us, I think us making the deal in late 2019 and closing March of 2020, COVID hit in the middle and everything became, and it was so hard to integrate. And when you're working off of Zoom, and us in this world didn't work off of Zoom ever. We flew to every single meeting. We were in person, and so not ever having that actual time to build team and come together and do all of that, I just think gave us a really tough start to our integration. So how it began is not how it ended, in my opinion. And what they wanted from us then became a financial burden. Culture is expensive. I mean, it just is very expensive. And never having that meeting of the minds between the two teams, because we were all so separated for a very long time. I mean, COVID went on for a long time before you actually got in person. I remember our first in-person board meeting was, I don't know, a year and a half after we integrated. I mean, it was like, it was some tough times. So, but we intentionally sold with the intent that we wouldn't be picked apart and dispersed, and that it was a good fit. And them Portfolio being strong in reinsurance, us being strong in reinsurance, we weren't fighting the non-reinsured type of purchase or,
Right.
So.
I'm assuming because, and we won't dig into the nuance too terribly much because you paid yourself, or, paid our listeners and viewers. The compliment is they bought you for the culture, but also there was some nuance behind the scenes. You got to select who you wanted to sell to. For all intents and purposes, like you alluded to, there were far monetarily better offers out there.
Right.
But this met your needs as far as how you hand off the keys to the kingdom, for lack of a better term, in the way that you wanted to pass that on to the next person. Did you see, meeting with leadership from Portfolio, since we're going to, obviously call them by name, and Dale, I'm going to get to your question.
Not hard to figure out.
Yeah.
It's a little late. Surprise.
Yeah, not hard to figure out for sure. But did you have the opportunity to interview them the same way that they were interviewing you?
100%.
100%, okay.
Yeah.
I think that's amazing, but I did want to obviously add that data point to our conversation here today because I think that's important. Whether you're working with a broker or, you behind the scenes doing it.
We did several interviews in person with their team, and both ways for that matter.
So Dale, this is a 3-year process. I don't know when you found out, and we don't need to go there. But you've got your mentor, you've got your friend in Kelly. You've got a company that
and then David as well. He
Yep.
was another guy that touched on me, hit the road with me several times, taught me one of the coolest things I've ever seen, where everybody's out here always be closing. And we sat in front of a dealer, and he said one of the things that have stuck with me to this day. He said, "Sir, I haven't earned the right to ask you for your business.
I love that.
But I intend to work hard enough to ask you for that opportunity." And it was like one of those things so give before you expect any kind of getting. And I think that within our kind of team mantra is we're going to help somebody get their desired outcome before we expect our income.
Well, and I think, again, not to segue too terribly much, but I think that is an important point. It is part of what we do and what we do well is to interview them as much as they're interviewing us. That same kind of dialogue that allowed you the opportunity to pick the right person to pass the keys onto that next generation. But you've got, Dale, it's approaching. You find out about it.
Yeah.
How does that affect, and your view, how did you take the news?
So we had experience through acquiring a different agency with Portfolio who may or may not allow us to be in reinsurance reviews and session statements as an agent. And we had NAE who was walking us in on every deal. They never went anywhere without us. If they were going to interact with our dealers, we were a part of it. So it was these two worlds. You hoped that when they did, the culture, as Kelly would say, was the thing that pushed through. Yes, they had the great reinsurance positions. They were usually managed by managing partners instead of direct representation where I could pick up a phone and talk to these guys. So it was very limited interaction when you had a Portfolio deal. So personally, I was excited, but you were also hesitant. You didn't know which one was going to come out on top. You have two very strong cultures, and as they come together, which way it's going to play out. In my opinion, it was painful as it went on. There were it's more from system integrations, things like that you can't really control. But
And COVID didn't help,
Yeah.
as Kelly said. I mean,
But
that was certainly...
you can see it today. Portfolio culture will fight through. So we did get the best of both worlds. We have the best reinsurance position, in my opinion, that mousetrap as they call it. And you have the culture that Kelly instilled in some of her leaders that has now taken over into that environment. So they've made the changes. They've seen the value in having these guys that are out there in the field, helping folks close deals. They're not closed doors. There's never a meeting now that we go into that's a portfolio meeting that doesn't involve us.
That's
so
amazing.
It's very much, again, it seems like the best of both worlds. We have the reinsurance, which they're very strong in. We have the transparency and the culture and the people that Kelly, that her, I guess, her system, her culture, her people are still rising to the top. They're not going to stay on the law of the lid. They keep bypassing that lid. If it sits there for too long, she's trained them very well. And she's, I'm a Maxwell guy as well. And I just saw this the other day and it made me think of her. She's like the lead to give. She doesn't lead to get. She's always trying to make sure her people, she pours into her people. And now you see it within that organization where there are a lot of NAE people leading with NAE culture and, but under Portfolio's umbrella.
That's amazing. And that's got to feel good.
Yeah, I love it.
I mean, part of, again, I just turned 50. One of the most important things now for me as I enter into, this generation of being in the car business is legacy for me. I still try to keep in touch with a lot of those people. And that part has to feel good coming from Dale. And I'm sure there were pain points, 100%. But as far as legacy goes, Kelly, has it disappointed, the transition, has it disappointed you at all? Has there been a point, and again, we're entering a whole new pivot with what transpired then versus what just got announced last month, and we won't go there yet. But with that being said, is there anything you look at that you wish would have happened differently, that you wish you would have been able to affect a little bit differently as you see that generation of leaders that you've touched? Dale being one of them. Dale being one of them is obviously, and I can sing his praises, and I'll do likewise, in the future. But is there anything that you wish would have been handled differently, or anything you wish would have stayed versus maybe fleeting and leaving the culture?
Yeah, well, the intent when we sold was not for me not to be the CEO eventually of Portfolio. So, but I also look back and I know that God has a better plan than I do. I don't know that some of the people that wish that I was still CEO today would agree with me, but I think, there were some challenges in having two CEOs come together and me try to move into a position where in the integration process, like I was very in tune top to bottom in everything in our organization.
I can imagine. Including
our programming and all of that. And so when you take, a CEO that's very interactive, David ended up being our president the last couple of years, and we were doing that intentionally, that if anything ever happened to me, he was prepared to take over the company. So one of us gets hit by, we never even flew on the same plane, right. So that way we knew that somebody was going to be there to take care of the company and I fully trusted in him and Andy to do that. But when you bring together now two CEOs, one that is very, very detailed in understanding how everything comes together, and one that is very top line and didn't build the business, came in as a CEO. Both are great ways to come into a company. But I knew too much to just watch things happening the way that they were without trying to get in the middle. But I also needed to let the teams fight through, at each level, what they needed to go through. So there wasn't really a place for me in the way they were going to continue to structure the company. Wasn't maybe the outcome that I would have wanted, but I also feel like God put me in a position. So I've done John Maxwell training for years, but I would write all of my own material. And so I was like, I think I want to do some executive coaching. And I Google executive coaching, and up pops this Maxwell certified trainer program for executive coaching. I'm like, who would have known? Well, I get there, I become a certified coach, and all of the material for all these books that I've trained in my company for years is already written, which would have been much nicer if I would have just become a certified coach at the time. But so that led me into doing a lot of masterminds and leadership training, and a lot of our agents, including Dale, came through those programs with me. And And so it was a way that I kind of transitioned. I was able to still feed from a leadership position into people, but they would have to sign up and pay for it. And 100% of it would go to a nonprofit organization. So it wasn't a money thing for me. I never took a dollar from it. It was about being able to pour in and help leaders become better leaders. And so I wouldn't have had the time to do that had I not. Now, granted, could I have helped leaders within my company? Certainly. You know what I mean? And a lot of the leaders in our company actually attended these. So it wasn't like, and so I still lead the team from a perspective of if they're struggling with something or they need a perspective of like, how do I address something in a good way, but firm, you know what I mean? That type of thing. So there's like that type of coaching I still do, but getting involved in that then led me to, I was doing a lot of that. And then one of our old clients, I was doing the coaching and invited me to become part of Sound of Freedom. And so when I got involved in Sound of Freedom prior to it being launched very shortly before it became launched into the movie theater, it really like, I had been doing some mission work with John Maxwell, like the 2 years leading up to it, but seeing the mission of helping these children, you know, that are being abducted for sexual acts and things like that, it just like the type of documentary of learning to like see that there's things going on in this world that, you know, when you're immersed in your business, you don't understand like all the crazy things happening. And so I saw a bigger picture of being able to, through documentaries and movies, be able to bring things to light for people. Like if you haven't watched Sound of Freedom, you have to watch it, because if you don't know what's happening in our country, we are the biggest consumer of paid childhood sex. It's crazy to me that there's so many men and women that will buy children to have sex with them for an hour, and these children are abused hour after hour all day long. And so starting to see some of that mission work, and then I got involved in another one for the blind, of letting people understand that 70% of the people that are blind are unemployed, but they actually can run very big companies. So it's called Surpassing Sight. We're still working on getting it out in a way that becomes a movie that blind can understand, but engaging enough for us that can see to understand. But these 4 individuals bike across America blind, and they're CEOs and attorneys, and I mean very powerful individuals, which led me to another innovation, medical. We were following a doctor that helps with PTSD, anxiety, depression, things like that, and they discovered a treatment that's a very general pain block that actually takes away a lot of this PTSD and anxiety and depression. And we started following them, and I walked into the doctor's office because I said, does this work for firemen? As if it would not work for firemen. I don't know why, and they said yes. And I said, I want to bring my son. My son's a fireman and suffers from like flashbacks of different calls that he's been on. And he's only been a fireman for 5 years, and within 2 years had some very traumatic experiences, and touch sensory, and not being able to sleep, and sirens going off in his head, and, you know, all the different things, the typical PTSD. And it's the reason suicide is so high in military, first responders, you know, that type of thing. And so I took him and I got this treatment. But when I walked in, I introduced myself and I said, Dr. Lipov, I'm Kelly, and I'm opening a center like this in Cleveland. And he's like, okay. And I said, no. I said, I've learned so much about this, but this isn't very well known, and I'm going to open a center in Cleveland. And that was just an absolute crazy journey, because I learned about it in 2023. I had been involved in Sound of Freedom, involved in Surpassing Sight, and they were writing this documentary, and the whole thing fell apart because the 2 people that had the footage started, you know, not doing well together. And so this documentary, but I was like, I don't want a documentary. I want a documentary, but I want to open a center and really spread the word about this. And I have seen so many lives changed by this treatment, but it was profound, because I went into a medical business that I have no earthly reason to be in opening a medical center. I am the furthest person from a medical degree, but I was like, and so I learned that an actual corporate person cannot own a medical center. A doctor has to own the medical center. So that was like, well, I guess I'm not supposed to open it. And then I was writing a letter to God, and I'm like, what am I supposed to be doing? And he's like, absolutely. I heard the word yes. Like, should I be opening this? And I literally was on a plane, and I turned around. And I thought, did somebody just say yes to me? And it was like, don't give up. You can do this. Well, this was December 22nd is when I walked in, and my son got the treatment. And in between Christmas and New Year's, I wrote a business plan. And then I wrote the business plan and went and presented it to the company that we went to. And I realized that a doctor owned it, but an actual, basically P3 firm or, an investment firm owned it. And so it was all about the money. Because when I said I want to discount it for military, I want to discount it for first responders, want to give some away. And they're like, no, we don't do that. And I'm like, well, this isn't. I literally felt like I was getting into bed with the devil related to what the mission of bringing this treatment to. Like, it wasn't a money thing for me. And so I was like, well, I'm not doing it with them. I guess I'm going to do it by myself. But I don't know, the equipment to buy. I don't know anything. And I just started hunting around, and I found a doctor in Cleveland that met me. And 3 days later, we agreed to do business. And that was like January 30th or something. And we opened the business April 1st. And
2024.
Yeah, all within 90 days. And so it was, and I had to learn a doctor's system. I had to learn medical terminology. I had to buy equipment. We had to get licensed to buy the drugs. We had to find so this gentleman actually works for the VA. So he couldn't do the actual treatment. So we had to find a doctor. We were 6 days away from opening, and we didn't have an agreement with a doctor. And the doctor that was helping me was going to fill in and try to help on nights and weekends until we could find a doctor. And all of a sudden we ended up with this doctor 6 days before. And it just was, the story. So we ended up doing the documentary more as a shortened version with some footage that Shaw had that started the documentary several years ago. And then we refilmed a lot of documentary from the patients we had treated and ended up coming out with a documentary. But it was supposed to be much more because they had a ton of military footage from people that have been been treated from military that we didn't get to put so much in. But yeah, it was crazy. It was just, so I feel like had I been left as a CEO, not that it wouldn't have been great, but I've been able to learn so much more about helping people and broadening the vision for different things in my life. And, who knows where I'll be a year from now. I could be back in the auto industry. I could be back. I don't know what I'll do.
We'll have another 10-page question and podcast flow. With that being, okay, so by no stretch of the imagination, the introduction that we did to begin this conversation an hour ago, this is the point where you just laid everything out there, and I need to go back. We need to talk about these things. I don't know how we gloss over Sound of Freedom. I don't know how we gloss over the documentary and being the associate producer in those, introduction to those. We're going to pull the thread of, your faith-based life and the role that God has, because you haven't been shy about it. And again, I'm talking to our viewers, I'm talking to our listeners when I say this. In the car business, we tend to shy away from God, politics, and anything else that would be, unfortunately, off limits. And I think it's unnecessary, and you are very vocal, as you should be, in my opinion. And I think Dale would agree about your faith. So we're going to touch on that too. But I want to touch on these things even before we get to the medical side, because I need to know what the treatment is. I'm very curious
what the documentary is,
and what. Yeah, we need to go back to that as well. But I do want to go back. I want to go back to because again, the base of that question, Kelly, was simply what would you have done differently, And again, I think you've illustrated the point that I'm not going to try to encapsulate. I'm not going to try to speak for you, but it would have been very difficult being a family-owned and operated company, family literally, tight-knit group, to be able to manage that as globally as you would have had to look at it, would have been forced to look at it, instead of knowing every position from the entry level all the way up to the executive side of things. During that process and during your answer, however, which is where I want to go with this, you were exposed to someone, or someone exposed you to the opportunity for Sound of Freedom. And it would take you 1 minute to have a guttural, visceral reaction and sick to your stomach during the subtitles to that movie as those first scenes rolled out, tell you about everything you need to know. And if you don't react the same way, then there probably is an issue. But talk to me about the passion you found with that. And Dale, did you know that she had done that?
No idea. Yeah. But it doesn't surprise me. She's good.
No, well, exactly. And it shouldn't shock any of our listeners and or viewers that would be something that, God would present to you in your life and with your path for you to be able to contribute to. Were you, because you had kind of said, as I think we all come to some realization, I think that movie certainly opened everybody's eyes, or I hope it would, anybody that viewed it, to that disgusting epidemic of
Yeah.
I don't even want to call it what it is.
We know what it is.
We'll leave it right there.
Evil.
But how did you kind of alluded to the fact that maybe you didn't have an inkling to how pervasive it was, and I don't think any of us do until we know. Mm-hmm. But has that become a passion for you? Has that become a catalyst to do more things with that?
I think more the catalyst was I think we need to not be naive to all the things that are going on in our world that we don't understand. And whether it's PTSD, whether it's, and obviously the PTSD that comes from any of these children that live out of this or try to come out of sex trafficking, and these women that are brought into it even in their teenage years, the sex trafficking, what our first responders go through, what a blind person goes through. I don't know that it's any one particular thing other than I think we need to be aware that somebody is going through something that we need to not be so judgmental. And in our culture training, we actually play a song by Sawyer Brown. And if you've never heard it, I think it's called, I'm not sure the exact word, but it's They Don't Understand. And basically it talks about, you could be driving down a road and there's somebody driving really slow and you're like so irritated with them, but you don't know that they just lost their wife or they might just be going through something. And so I think just remembering that we don't know it all and we don't know everything going on in somebody's life. And so for me, that would probably be my biggest mission, is to let people understand that we are brought, God calls us to love. The number one commandment is love. And I love my friend John Maxwell, and I've been blessed. And that was another thing, is getting into this coaching program with John. I actually became very involved in his nonprofit called Equip. And they're bringing values and actions through education in the middle school area to school systems around the world, to stop violence and get people to learn to forgive, get people to learn to love. And even though it is not a scriptural based teaching, but if you know the Bible, you know that the words and the way that he has written it is to get people to that same point of valuing others and loving others. And so by being involved with him, he will open up, if you've ever seen him speak, is I'm John, I'm your friend. Right? That's the first thing he says. And he really means it. But if you go to any of his faith services, he'll say, I will tell you, my belief is in Jesus Christ. And I want you to know him and love him like I do. But if you don't, I'm still your friend. I still love you. And so I think that for me, my passion about bringing Christ to others is to know that it is not a fearful God. It's a loving God, and that if we are to do right by others, we just need to love them, even though there are difficult people around us or people we don't agree with, and people that are broken and that may have been broken from a very early age in sex trafficking, or a father or a mother that's been dealing with PTSD that has anger issues. Those are things that are brought upon us, and that we need to understand that people behave in different ways, not because of necessarily what they've done, but often what has happened to them. And so my mission, and I give away books, like my mission is to give away 50,000 books before I die. And so I give away books but I only give away books that I've read or I believe in. I don't just I'm not a library, like, don't call me and ask me for, I do have some people that'll give me a list this long. I'm like, never heard of any of those. That's not my mission, but I want to give away books that I know will bring value to people. And some of them are faith-based and some of them aren't. But I think that in John's teaching, what I've learned is we just have to remember to love. And so my mission is just to love, but also not to be blind to what's going on in the world. And I don't do politics. Like, I don't get involved. I literally will not argue. I will not talk. I don't want to hear about it. But watching how much politics has divided even people in my family to the point that they don't even speak. And when you're like, you have that level of division, tells me that you truly haven't surrendered to what is most important in life, is to love one another, regardless of our differences. We all have different opinions, and I promise you, John has a different opinion than everybody else, but he doesn't not love somebody. And I've sat with him over the last 3 years. We've been in Papua New Guinea. I've been in Brazil with him. I've been in Dominican Republic and watched him sit across from world leaders and just pour into them and ask them questions. And when they are like, what do you want from me? He's like, I don't want anything. But if we can get into your education system, we'll give it to you for free. We want to teach values and actions to these children in the education system. In Costa Rica, they have dropped the violence down. They've been in Costa Rica the longest. So far in the high schools, like 50 to 70%, because they started teaching these kids values and actions. Forgiveness and love and kindness and all these different things, so that when they get to high school, they don't respond in violent ways. But we're not teaching that at an early age. So that's probably like one of the biggest things. But I would have never done that if I would have stayed the CEO of Portfolio, because I would have been too busy running the business. So that's why I look at it and I'm like, it all comes around, like what I'm supposed to be.
I think it's amazing. Let's take a deep dive back to when you were moving out of the house as a freshman, correct?
Running away. It was a moving.
Yep.
Yes.
That is your story to tell for sure, and I will use your word.
I was going to say, I don't know that there was a planned move, but yes.
I understand. The U-Haul wasn't rented. It
No.
was okay.
Yeah.
I understand. With that being said, I really kind of want to dig deep into this faith-based mission that you've been on. I would assume, I don't want to assume, I want to ask, was that something, was your path clear with him that early on? When did you find God as far as strongly, not necessarily as strongly as you are firmly planted today, but when did you find that path and give him the credit and prioritize him versus some of the other things we've been discussing?
Well, it's funny because even early in my automotive years, people would call me the church lady, but I would say I was far from the church lady compared to how I feel about Christ today. But I give the credit to I would call her my mom today, but she was my third mom. She's the one that kind of raised me, but she took us to church, to a Catholic church, and I did my first communion and all of that. But I grew up fearing God, and I grew up in a very, like, you'll go to hell if, you'll go to hell if, you'll go to hell if. And so I think even though I believed in God, that personal relationship with God didn't happen until I got into a 12-step program. And I learned that God is a loving God, and it's not, if you don't do this, repentance, if you don't do this. And so leaving the Catholic religion, going to more of a non-denominational, just almost spiritual. I didn't go to church for many years for, in a period of time where I just was like, I'm not doing that, but I know that there's something out there. And so once I really learned like how loving our God is, and that this is not, you have to have a fear of God in a healthy way, but not in a you're going to hell way. Like, I don't think that's for me, at least. And so once I really got into doing that, and then I had a lot of women around me, but I brought God into our company, but in a way that you don't have to be a believer. I just want you to know, I'm going to pray over a meal. I'm going to pray before our associate
That's
meeting.
amazing. Yep.
I'm going to do that. And so, some people that would leave the company would write, like, just so you know, if you start there, you're getting into a cult, like on Glassdoor. Well, they obviously weren't a culture fit. But I mean, I had music playing in the building that was country, AC/DC. I had every mix of music. I wasn't opposed to like one particular thing. But I did want people to know that I love you and you're important to me, regardless of what your race, religion, sexual choice, whatever it is. I love you no matter what. And I think that that's what Jesus displays in the Bible. I was just studying it this morning about, when we walk, act, and talk like Jesus, we are not judging people. We are loving them.
Correct.
And we are not the people that should judge. I mean, do I like everything our president does? No. But I haven't liked everything any of our presidents
Correct.
have done. But I also have to have a respect for, I'm not in that position. I have no idea what they're going through. And nobody's going to do it right. Like, in everybody's opinion. And our pastor always says at church, like, y'all can pray for Ohio State to win, but on the other side, 50% of them are paying for Michigan to win.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, somebody's going to lose in these prayers, Yes. And so I just have to remember that everybody's hoping and wishing for something else. And all that my job is to love them and treat people with kindness and to give the way that Jesus wants me to give. And I donated a lot of our proceeds and gave a lot of our money to our associates when we sold. But my thing is that if I give with an open hand, I also can receive with an open hand. And so, and John Maxwell says that a lot, is like, if you're holding on like this, you cannot get anything because your hands are closed. So you've got to give, and you've got to give freely. And so I think that that's just kind of, and I happened to stumble upon a church, it was right before we sold, like 2017-18, that when I walked in, and I would say this, keep going to different churches until you find yours, because it will be something different for everybody. But when I walked in and they started singing, I started bawling. I knew I was home, and we just went through a pastoral change. And I was like, oh, no. Like, and then I was like, who am I? He's not God. You know what I mean? Like, that person isn't God, even though he's a great friend of mine. And I've been able to go in and do leadership training for them. And they let me host my Live to Lead event and all of that.
That's
there.
awesome.
But I was like, who am I to say that the next person's not going to be that much better? And he's only been there like a month and a half, but I already love him. You know what I mean? And so, but you have to let go of it being about people and just know that, it was really the people in the church that were the best part of that church, not the pastor, even though I love his speaking. But when you involve yourself and immerse yourself in the culture and surround yourself, then you learn from everybody, and it's not about one person. And I think we have to be careful that it's not about one person.
Well, and I think it's amazing because I think, and I hope it illustrates for everybody watching this, that whether or not it was strictly a biblical or a God's path, part of your culture, part of the entirety of your career, really, that was the bedrock. And I use that term obviously literally. And I think that I just want to make sure that we touch on that again, that is part of it. You touched on something briefly and suggested a 12-step. Do you want to dig into that at all as far as that pivot point in your life and how important that was?
I think that what it taught me, I'm not involved in it anymore. I think it was a time and a place that was very important for me to be. I spent about 10 years, but it was a time when I ended up getting divorced from my first husband. We got married very young, got married for the wrong reasons. It wasn't a healthy relationship. We're friendly now. I got my first son out of it. We were married 7 years. I was never going to get divorced. Ever going to get divorced, because I had been through so many, but it was not a good situation for me from an emotional abuse standpoint. And so I eventually just was like, I can't stay in this marriage any longer. But it was at the same time that I joined the 12-step program. And what I found in it is when you really go through it and surrender, whether, in the 12 steps, they're like, if you don't believe in God, then just surrender to something bigger than yourself.
Yep.
And so sometimes people just have to, I say to people that aren't believers, don't take the weight of your shoulders on your shoulder, or the weight of the world on your shoulders. You can't do it all alone. So if you don't believe in God, believe in something bigger than yourself, the sky, the universe, whatever it is, because when you try to take it all on yourself, that's where suicide comes from and major depression comes from. And so when you know that there's not anything bigger than you and it's all you, well, and you're depressed or whatever, then, I mean, those options become very limited. And so I think I learned so much about forgiveness and amends, making amends, forgiving others, and just living in more of a state of gratitude through that program. And some of my very best friends today all came from that program. And, you know, and so I think you get really deep relationships when you're talking in deep levels. And people today don't talk in depth. They're very, very surface level. Everybody's afraid to, I mean, even in police and fire departments, in the military, we will treat people, special operatives, we treat probably 20, 25 special operatives a month. And if they tell the military that they have been treated for PTSD, they will actually be eliminated from certain activities. And if they're pilots, they won't be able to fly anymore, and they won't be able to get a job outside. So they hold it all in. And it's crazy to me that we are asking people that are giving up their lives for us to protect us to not talk about the struggles that they're having. And even in police and fire departments, it is like, and a lot of them, taboo to talk. Now it's getting a little bit better, but it is like when you cannot talk about your emotional health, especially as a man. I have in my bigger mastermind with John Maxwell some high level leaders, and one of them came to me and said, I just need you to know, like, what you're doing with Reset in the medical center. I actually tried to take my life 3 years ago, and nobody would know that because I'm a high level leader. I'm a big entrepreneur. I mean, has corporations all over the country. And he said, I need to find a way to let like this level of people know that you're not alone. You know what I mean? But people are so afraid to talk about their mental health that it just becomes, you don't know what else to do. So scary. So I like the 12-step program and the depth of what it can bring for you. And I learned so much. So
obviously there's some Christian influence in both Maxwell and a 12-step program, a normal 12-step program. And obviously your path with God has led us to this part where you're identifying love as that's the North Star, as it should be. And there are some biblical words for that, some Hebrew words for that, you know, we don't need to delve into here necessarily, but knowing your passion for that, knowing your bedrock with all of this, walk us through Reset. Talk to me about what it is, what it does, how it's different, because we're talking about PTSD. We're talking about some things that have become more normalized, and it's also become and revealed some treatments that are out there. You know, there's ayahuasca, there's ibogaine, and I'm ex-military, and we don't need to delve into that. My son is a police officer and SWAT team member up in North Dakota, who I'm very proud of, and I do keep a thumb on that. That is something that I'm aware of. I know Dale is too, and this is something that needs to be normalized. It can be as simple as, you know, even just talking about men's feelings. I mean, we can go down that path as well, which is very difficult. But there are some operators out there in the social media sphere, DJ Shipley with GBRS Group, and who's normalized a lot of that. I want to know, I have a good understanding, I think our listeners do too, and I know Dale does. I know how you got here in some sense of the word, but why this? Why this particular? Son was a firefighter and suffered from. Why this passion for this?
Well, a couple of things. I have had people, you know, that have struggled immensely. And one of them is David's wife, and struggled immensely from depression and crippling anxiety to the point of not being able to get out of the house, not be able to come to our events, that type of thing. And David and I, you know, I became, you know, I knew what was going on. Not a lot of people did. And as soon as I found out about this treatment and following the doctor on the documentary, I called them and I'm like, we've got to get Jody in And then I was like, and I've got it. I called my son immediately and I said, come over here and I want you to listen to this. And he's like, I need to do that because as a firefighter, whether you've been on one really bad call or 10, I mean, and you don't get, like he lives and works in the same area that he serves in. And so he drives past these houses, a father that, killed his wife in front of the children and, and then killed himself and like those type of things, like right across the street from our house in that neighborhood. So he doesn't get to like drive by and not think about it anymore. And, and people that really, really suffer from anxiety and depression, and oftentimes it isn't something new. It's something that happened to them as a child or happened to them as an adult. And so I immediately said that we need to get Jody in and I need to get Dustin in. And so Dustin went first. And then he said to me, I think Emmanuel needs this more, his husband, more than I do. And I said, well, let's have him. He scored off the charts for PTSD. And he was at a point that he couldn't even go to the grocery store or drive. And I didn't even know this. He kept it all to himself and had bulimia since 2009. And both of them got treated. And Emmanuel tells me like a week later, he's like, I haven't thrown up in a week. And I'm like, what? And I didn't even know he had bulimia. And I said, you never shared this with me. And so we're finding that this treatment is helping because a lot of times the anxiety and depression cause other things, substance abuse, bulimia, eating disorders, all of the things. And so when you treat the core issue, not just medicate the problem. And my executive health doctor at the Cleveland Clinic, top of the Cleveland Clinic, said to me, Kelly, I was having some gut inflammation issues. And she said, I'm going to keep handing you pills. But until you go to a functional medicine doctor and they figure out what is causing this,
right,
I'm going to keep handing you pills. So what is happening with PTSD and anxiety is we keep handing people pills. So very similar to going out and doing a mushroom trip or doing that type of thing is it's resetting the sympathetic nervous system similarly without going through all the chaos that you have to do when you go on, these trips. And I've had friends that have done it and it's been very helpful, but the treatment resets your sympathetic nervous system. So you have a stellate ganglion block is what it is. And they figured it out actually by doing the stellate ganglions on military individuals that had phantom nerve pain in their arms. So when they did the stellate ganglion, it takes away the phantom nerve pain in the arm, but they would come back and say, I no longer have recurring nightmares. I'm not as angry. I'm not this. So they started doing this study about 20 years ago. And that's where Dr. Lipov and Dr. Mulvaney really became like the impetus for all of this. And they were finding out, and now they found out that if they do both sides, they used to only do the right side, and then now they do both sides, and it's like some earlyhood trauma can be, taken away. But what happens is in your stellate ganglion, you have your nervous system, and generally, if I have a thought, I get the thought, it goes to my frontal lobe, and I think, oh, okay, I have to go to the grocery store. And I put it in my little compartment back here, and I remember I've got to go to the grocery store. But I don't sit here and think, I've got to go to the grocery store, I've got to go to the grocery store, I've got to go to the grocery store. Because I have the ability to compartmentalize my thoughts. When your nervous system has been injured, and it truly is an injury, and they're working on changing PTSD, a disorder, to an injury, because it's an injury to your sympathetic nervous system. When it's been injured, your nervous system sits literally in an MRI in a red state. So if you did an MRI today and you were laying there and you were completely calm, your nervous system looks like it's actually still ignited, like as if you're being chased by a bear. So we have a nervous system for a reason that if I get chased by a bear, I get this adrenaline rush and I can move and I can fight for myself. Or if I'm being attacked and you get like this superhero strength that you never have normally, and that should turn off as soon as you're no longer under attack. But when we injure it, it just sits in flames. So when people say, boy, he's got a really hot temper, he goes from 0 to 10 immediately. Actually, he's already sitting at a 9.
Right.
Or she is sitting at a 9. So anything little that triggers you.
It's the amygdala hijack.
The amygdala, and so all of a sudden it's sitting at that point. And so they don't have a proper response. Don't have a proper fight or flight. So either people sit in a flight mode and they're curled up in a ball in an anxious state and can't go out of the house and can't do things similar to Jody, or you have somebody that's sitting there and they're so angry all the time and they can't, and they're beating their wife up, or they're doing something, or causing crime, or, they're jumping out of a car, and instead of somebody getting an accident and jumping out of a car and going, oh, dude, are you okay? They're pulling a gun and saying, why'd you hit me?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so being able to calm that nervous system down. So the stellate ganglion literally calms the nervous system down for 6 to 8 hours. It allows the nervous system to reset, the nerve endings to heal, and new neural pathways to grow. And so people become much calmer and much more in control of their fight or flight. Now, if you have had deep-rooted trauma and you don't do something to help to keep that meditation, exercise, proper sleep, things like that, then it will reignite or if you go back into, let's just say you're in a domestic violence relationship and you come and you get the treatment and then you decide to go back to that relationship, it's going to reignite it. You know what I mean? So you may have to have another one if you put yourself back in that situation, which first responders, for a fireman, every 72 hours, they get to go back into a situation of laying there sleeping, going, is the alarm going to go off? Is the fire going to go off? When I get in the truck, am I going to a murder-suicide, or am I going to a lift assist?
Sure.
You know what I mean? It's like that constant fight or flight. So as a first responder, once you can calm that nervous system down, doing therapy, things like that are very, very important. But hopefully you no longer have to mask with drugs and alcohol, which is what most of them turn to. And the suicide rate, as soon as they retire, is off the charts.
Off the charts. Mm-hmm. Absolutely off the charts.
Yeah.
The stats are extraordinary.
Yep.
I will ask this, and I do want to know. So obviously, you have friends and family members that are suffering. You identify doctors with a docuseries. Why not just invest? Why does Kelly Price have to build it? What?
Well, that's what everybody says. Kelly, you can just observe. You don't have to go cure the world.
Sure.
And so I'm working on that balance of trying to not have a rescue mentality of everything, because I think my whole life I see an issue and I want to rescue it. And actually,
I prefer this mode. I'm not going to lie. I want to continue to get to know you, but I would prefer there's Kelly Prices in the world that want to rescue Let's stick with that. Don't let anybody talk you out of that, please.
Well, and it's funny because when I saw the disservice to dealers of what was happening in the administration company for my own dealer of not having financial statements and not having it balanced. And if I sent you $3,000 and I paid you $100 of admin fee on 10 contracts, where's the rest of my money in my reserve account, and why doesn't it balance after this claim is paid? And so my mission became, we will balance our reinsurance statements and your bank account to the penny. And I remember early on in our relationship with our new A-rated insurer at the time, they're like, we don't balance to the penny. I'm like, I do. And if I told the dealer it's to balance to the penny, it's going to be balanced to the penny. And when you put the wrong amount of money into an account, because we balance every single account every single month, if you put the wrong amount of money into the account, that is our name, even though you've done it wrong. And so it became a big battle. They said, if we're within $15 million of balancing, we figure ourselves to be, in their big, huge company, obviously, within balance. And I go, well, that doesn't work for me. I want to be within zero. And so, but having, that was a rescue mentality. When I look back on it, I was like, this isn't fair. A dealer thinks they're paying $100 admin fee. The rest of the money should be in the account, should be accounted for. And so that became like a mission, again, the way it should be. It was truly, it has to be the way it should be. And so balancing to the penny became what we talked about, you know what I mean? And the dealer having full transparency on every single claim became our notification system. They knew, as soon as we processed the claim, they knew it happened, so that if they knew something was wrong or a technician was taking advantage or they wanted to pay that claim versus it going through their warranty because maybe they didn't catch it in the reconditioning of the car, we wanted them to have that exposure to what it is. Now, some of the dealers would be like, way too many emails, way too much communication, don't need to know that. Great. Well, your agent will handle it for you then. You know what I mean? Like, but we wanted to empower people to be able to control their own business. It was their business. It's not our business. We are hired to do a job, and that is to administrate the contract.
So do you see with providers in this new industry, this new Mount Everest that you're about to climb, do you see similarities there? Do you deal with some of the same things? Do you have some insights in that insurance world maybe, or just the medical side of things that line up with what you're doing now with Reset?
I mean, well, we don't take insurance at Reset. Number one, it's not covered by insurance.
Right.
Mental health, a lot of mental health things that are not pharmaceutical. Big pharma is basically blocks just about anything
100%, yeah.
related to that. So we're cash pay. We've got some ways to do it. But I just think it's a pretty interesting world, the medical world in general. But I haven't delved into too much of the insurance side of it. And I probably would just be guessing how broken it is.
I think we'll save that one for another
Careful,
podcast.
in 5 years, you're going to see a whole new insurance platform out there.
That's 100% true.
But I'd circle back where she was talking about rescuing, but it sounds
Yes.
like there's another word for it that she used at the end there, is empowering. She's giving these people, she's empowering the folks around her. She finds the idea, and she finds the problem, and she has a solution, but then she empowers these dealers, these firemen, these police officers to come in and have an alternative to just suffering is to make a change, and she's creating change.
Yeah, I think awareness, right? And I think David's point when he went on the call with you is, I'm not going to ask you for your business, but I'm going to ask you some questions you need to be asking yourself, right? And so I want you to ask yourself all these questions, and we had a list of, 40 or 50 questions. Ask yourself all these questions. Do you get a profit and loss in a balance sheet every month that balances to the amount of money that you gave to the administrator? Do you know when each claim is coming in, and do you know who the technician was and how many days to claim? But do you know this today, or do you know this 6 months from now? So I didn't have to sell them. I just said, ask yourself these questions. Because, is there a loss adjustment expense that you cannot find because it's buried inside of the claim fee that is technically more admin fee that you're paying that you don't know that you're paying? Like, all of these questions are questions you need to be asking. And then if you see a need, let me know and we can help you identify it. Because truly, all we wanted to do was educate people and let them know there is a way that you can be more in the know than you are today. And I remember I sat with a dealer that was a JM&A dealer, very large dealer, 44 stores on a retro. And I said, he's a friend of mine. And I said, do you understand reinsurance? And he says, well, they said we're too big for reinsurance because we have too many stores. Okay, I guess you probably don't fit under the caps of a 831B, but you're not too big for reinsurance. And I said, let me do an education for you. And I brought him into the office, and our kids had played sports together for many years. So I was like, never asked him for the business. I wasn't going to put me and business in between that, and I educated him. And he said, but I go on this amazing boat trip every year. And I said, do you know you bought the boat that you get to rent once a year, And so anyway, but just education overall, is what people don't understand. And I think if your desire is to truly educate, and I still never asked him for the business, and after I left the business, so to speak, he now does reinsurance, and I consulted with him and I helped him through it all. But I think that if you do it with the heart of what is good for one is good for all, and if I end up being the beneficiary of it, that's great. But again, giving knowledge and letting people understand, and whether it's the same, whether it's in the medical field, whether it's, in a documentary, whether it's coaching countries. I mean, when we sat across from the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, and he was so on guard because everybody wants something from them because they've discovered a tremendous amount of oil off of the country of Papua New Guinea, and they have the largest rainforest in the whole world. And so they have things that everybody wants control of. Japan, everything. So he's on guard of everything. And so when we sat down with him we were sitting, there was like 10 or 12 of us sitting there, and John says, we met with your Minister of Education. You want to do this series on, they're a Christian-based country, in like their actual laws of the country, a Christian-based country. And he said, you sit here and you want to bring good values and actions, but we already have this written. We'll give it to you. We'll come in. But before he ever did that, he talked to him and said, tell me what your needs are. Tell me what, and the guy was like so close up. By the end of it, I literally described to John, when we sat in the debrief of that meeting, I said, I watched a wound up caterpillar, like so tight, just blossom into a butterfly. This guy opened up. He barely made it to this breakfast meeting. And then he goes, what are you guys doing at 11:30? And the whole government for them was on a vacation that week. And he goes, what are you guys doing at 11:30? And he says, come in to whatever their White House is type thing. And he brought us in, and they had, within 2.5 hours, arranged this huge meal, like, I mean, red tablecloths and beautiful things. And he had brought in anybody that could come from his government in, so that John could share with him what they're bringing into countries and values and actions for free. Nothing. What do you want from me? Nothing. I want nothing from you. I'm here to give you. Now, he relies on donors to donate money to his nonprofit to give these types of things. But I mean, when you watched what happens when you're not looking for anything and your hand is just open, and the change that it can make in a country, I was just like, I mean, there's bigger work to be done out there, and he's 78 and literally will speak 3 different times a day in 3 different cities, and travel tonight to another country to speak tomorrow and go to somewhere else. I can't keep up with him. I was with him for a week, and I said, I'm exhausted, John. I have no idea how you are doing this, but I need a nap.
I need a vacation. Can I get a vacation? We all do. There are bigger things that need to be done for sure. I do want to touch on one thing, because of course you've alluded to a sabbatical. Kelly Price is in sabbatical, maybe going a little stir crazy. And I do want to ask some questions to follow that up. But I do want to touch on the latest news that got announced last month, that there was another merger. Mm-hmm. And 2 very large players are now, one is acquiring the other. I mean, technically.
Protective is acquiring Portfolio.
Correct.
Yeah.
Where does that put Kelly Price? Are you going to continue on the board? Are you going to continue to be involved? Are you going to continue to do as you said? I mean, I'm not going to use this term lightly. Are you going to continue to shepherd those individuals with your company along that path and help them grow? Are you going to be part of that equation? Yeah,
I don't think that'll be a choice that I have. They're a publicly traded company. Their board is all internal employees. And I haven't been asked to be. I don't think really anybody other than the people running inside of our company right now are in those type of walls or conversations, which I kind of knew going into it. I also feel like sitting on a board of companies, even Portfolio, the influence you have truly at the operational level is very minimal. You don't get brought into operational things. They're very big picture items. What's the debt look like? What's the cash look like? What's this look like? You know what I mean? And for me, it's probably not where I'm best. Like, I mean, I can give my input, but I mean, operations is really culture, you know what I mean, what I do best. So sitting on a board. Is
that sad to close that chapter? I mean, that part of it, is it?
I think that chapter left probably like 1.5 years or 2 years ago. When I really stepped away from the day-to-day business in 2022, the beginning of 23, is when I went just to the board. And so that's when I became very big into doing like a lot of leadership training and things like that. 2022, 2023. Actually, it was 2022, I guess, is when I stepped to the board only. And so getting involved in doing the leadership training, I'll still do that. I run a leadership training event every year. Most of it is infiltrated with people from my old company and agents and, different things like that. And then new people that I've met along the way, and now the medical side. And I'll do the training. I'll still work with John Maxwell. I'll do all that. And then I have, deep relationships to guide and mentor people, mostly probably from coping with change in environments where I would say the bigger you get, the less communication companies have it, down into the stream, or unless you're extremely diligent with it. And I don't think
that scale issue.
I don't think we have a large company in our industry that is very diligent at communicating all the way through the ranks. And that's just how it is. And I think my opinion is, and if I would say, people always say, would you sell again if you knew? I don't know. I think I had to look at how do you survive in a really regulated industry that some players have caused it to be so cost prohibitive for administrators to do things right and not be owned by the big boys. It's very challenging because there are some, like all the lender integration with the states and all of that is so expensive to do it right and to do business the way that you should be doing business. So it's very challenging. So I don't think there was, I don't want to say a lot of options, but we were the largest administrator not owned by a private equity. In competing with administrators owned by private equity or owned by a publicly traded company, the money is too hard to compete with. You know what I mean? You just, with dealer loans, I think it'll switch back, and I think that you'll see things come back the other way. But from a customer service and a culture perspective, private equity, in my opinion, is the biggest killer of both of those, of customer service and culture. And I don't know a lot of people owned by a private equity or a large organization that have that level of service.
It's I firmly believe
not
that
in
mutually,
our industry, just
no.
in general.
Well, and again, being the automotive retail, there are so many similarities there, and I have the same belief that we're looking at the pendulum and it'll swing back to family owned and operated, or at least family owned groups. And I think it holds some of the same pitfalls like what you're talking about in our specific industry, with me being on this side of the table.
Yeah,
I definitely agree. So we know how brief this sabbatical is going to be. I mean, for anybody that knows you, what is next for Kelly Price? What is the next? What does the mission look like? There's no next.
There's no next. So October 1st, I started into a 6 month of being still. I literally wrote a blog about it about a month in, because I thought I still kind of think maybe I'm bursting at the seams, but I made a commitment to not make any large purchases over $5,000, to not entertain or talk about a new job, company, mission, anything like that, other than going on a mission trip with maybe a group, but not leading it, not being it, you know what I mean? But just really like stepping back and going on a pretty deep spiritual journey that I'm going on a little over 2.5 weeks just by myself. And I'm going to do a water fast for 14 days. I've never gone even 24 hours without eating. So, but just to have a really deep spiritual connection and some deep writing time, and to figure out where it is that God's leading me next, because I think that when we stay busy, we can miss God's call. And so everything kept telling me, I transitioned, I guess what would help in this is I transitioned the medical facility to the doctor that was the practicing doctor. So it financially, at the price we wanted to offer the treatment, didn't work to have 2 doctors, 2 companies, 2 everything. And it was never a money thing for me anyway. And I was putting money into it, and I wanted it to survive. I don't care if it makes any money. I don't care if I ever get paid back the money that I put into it. I won't get paid back. I know that. But so I transitioned it to him so they could run it as a smaller medical facility, and do the treatments and not have all the overhead of 2 companies, 2 doctors, all of that. Because I needed a doctor to be the owner and the doctor to do the practicing. And so it was 2 companies, 2 malpractice, 2 everything. And so I transitioned that to him, basically handed him the business, the doctor that we hired, and in August, and I still obviously very active in helping to promote it, that type of thing. But so I started a 6-month thing of just no decisions, no anything, just trying to be still, try to live in the day, not look forward, not make, I mean, I'm a really big goal setter. And so my vision board looks really different for 2026. I mean, it's like go on a mission, go on a date night with my husband, like things, and I'm sure things will come, but I want that to come from God and not from me, because I think a lot of times, like I said, when we're very, very busy, we might miss the call that God's giving us.
Do you think there's anything that you could have done differently, anything that we could have done any differently, or just industry-wide done differently post-pandemic tailwinds of?
That was the craziest time of my life, I think, I will tell you. I was really proud of the group of administrators led by Tony Wanderen and myself and a couple of other people, but we came together and put together a fund. You know, initially it was like, okay, like who's hurting the most in our industry? F&I managers are literally dependent on a car being sold, and there wasn't any cars being sold. So we had put together a fund really quickly that we ran through the foundation that I opened in 2018 called Changing Lives Foundation. And we were able to run it through so that people could get the money, not taxed. And we were able to give out like $550,000
Wow.
that administrators pulled together. So I thought like that was really cool at the beginning. I just remember we were in the middle of our sale. We were supposed to close March 30th. And then March 16th, when the world shut down, we got a termination letter from the bank, you know, like for some bogus reason. But you couldn't really fight it, but they terminated all their deals. Like everybody that was in the middle of a deal, everything got terminated, not just in the auto industry, like globally, most of the deals, I should say. And so we repieced it together and ended up closing in June. But it was crazy for me because we went from being an all in-person company to sending everybody home within 72 hours. And our team handled it. Our IT team was phenomenal. We didn't miss a beat. But I can't even imagine like what was going on in every administrator's world. Like, how do you get people home? You know, that type of thing. Luckily, we had so many good processes built that we kind of moved very quickly. But we were having meetings twice a day. You would make a decision in the morning, and by afternoon, that was no longer valid because somebody in the government had changed a rule or a regulation or something. And so it was a constant, and I will give my team, the entire company, credit. Everybody was so good about moving and shaking and doing whatever. We did our very best to keep every single person employed. We did not furlough very many people, but in kind of redeployed some of the resources and things. I don't know that I would be a good judge of what somebody could do right or wrong, because this wasn't anything anybody could have predicted. None of us had ever been through it. We didn't work by Zoom. We didn't work remotely. We didn't have the structure. You know, you relied a lot on over the cubicle. Hey, does anybody know how to do this? Or can anybody help me?
Right.
I can't get to this call. This client's calling in. Whatever it was, like those communications. So all of a sudden now we're using Teams and chat and things in different ways than we were. And I remember we did a series of like agent calls where we once a week would do something to educate them and keep them motivated and keep them engaged. And you know, Dale, you were on some, Steve was on some, like, you know, doing all that. But we were trying to figure out, like, what do we do? How can we add value? What can we do for our clients? And then people are struggling really quickly. How do you deliver a deal remotely? You know, like all of the different things. The only thing that I would say that I don't think the industry did right, and this is probably going to be against popular opinion, is we didn't bring our people back fast enough. And still, even to this day, I think that as much as companies, and a lot of companies have taken advantage of the savings of not bringing people in, the loss that they are incurring that they don't even know from engagement. And I mean, there's software out there now that can track how often the people are on their computers and doing that. And the discoveries in, like, I'm in a big mentorship group or mastermind group with a lot of business owners that they're finding of how little time people are actually working is unbelievable. Like, and then the entitlement to this work-life, home-life balance, of I should be able to take time off and do this. And if I want to go, I mean, we had people that were at home and with no daycare, which during COVID was different, but still today have no daycare for their kids, and they're watching their kids while they're working. That's not fair to the client. It's not fair to the employer. It's not fair to really the children. You know what I mean? Like you may feel like you have better work-life balance, but it actually isn't fair to anybody involved. And so if I was going to do anything, I would have been much more brave, like some companies out there, and said, if you want a job, you're going to come back. And a lot of people wouldn't come back, or they were demanding huge increases during COVID. I mean, the cost of the hourly rate of pay went up so high because nobody wanted to go work at McDonald's or that. So then all of a sudden McDonald's is paying $15, $18 an hour. Well, we had people in our claims team not making $15 or $18 an hour. And so then you have those costs, but we set our rates when I sold you that contract.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so now all of a sudden my payroll is doubled, but income that I sold you that contract at is not double. And the same thing happened in claims, is nobody really understood the impact of the rising costs are 30% higher to process a claim, but we reserved for that contract. And so the dealers are like, you're not doing it right. You're paying too many claims. Oh, no. It's the severity of the claim. And then because people aren't maintaining their cars right, and manufacturers are cutting corners and building cars, it's like this whole big snowball that I just think the world ran away with itself, and it's completely out of control from a cost perspective. Everything in the inflation is so high, and it's just very hard to keep tabs on. But what really hurts are the reinsurance position of the dealers, the insurers, the claims handling, how tight you have to be on a claim that you maybe wouldn't have been before, or a dealer wants to be a little bit more generous, but then they don't understand why their loss ratios are out of control. So it's very hard to get a grip on all of that, and no one person, in my opinion, is to blame, because we've all been put in this situation.
Impossible to see. But let's explore that for a second too, with a follow-up to that. Kelly Price, NAE 2026. How would you address that with the cost of parts going up, with the cost of labor, all the labor increases that we all did during COVID, guilty as charged? But with that being said, to offset that, how would you right the ship for that, for the reinsurance positions?
Just because I haven't sat in the chair and I don't know the ins and outs of everything, I don't know if I'm the best educated person, but I always say when something is broken, start with the foundation. And so a lot of times if when we grew too much, we had to break everything. You know what I mean? Foundationally, even just starting with our first team. And I think for me is going back to the foundation and looking at where does it start? Because I can't fix the rates and the reserves that I had in the past.
Correct.
Right? I can't do that. But in education for the dealers and the agents are primary. I mean, making sure that everybody understands what's happening. Employing new technology the best that I can, as fast as I possibly can, that allows us to work smarter rather than harder, and really looking at what is it that the manufacturers are now doing that is really impacting us, that maybe they've done something to correct some of their losses that are impacting us on the other side. But it really takes a deep dive, and I think it would take a team of people to really kind of put aside their day-to-day job and rebuild that foundation and almost start again with some education. You're probably going to lose some clients, and you're probably going to lose some people in the process. But in the end, I think it's no different than me taking my direct business model and saying, we've got to separate that for the health of the company, even though financially it wasn't a win for us. But, just making the foundation of what it is that we do the very best that we can. So that's all that I don't know. I mean, that's only obviously you just hit me with the question, but I would have to really sit down, but I'm not in it day to day. So I'd have to re-educate myself a little bit of what happened and why we're at. I mean, I know why we're at, I can logically understand it, but how do we unwind ourselves out of that, nobody's going to like it. It's an increase in costs. It's an increase in admin fee. It's an increase in, in everybody. I mean, our admin fee, over the last 20 plus years went from, A up here down to Z, but our increase in our expenses went this way. In the pressure between the dealer and the agent on lower admin fees has hurt everybody, including the agent and the dealer and the consumer, because when you compress the admin fee, the service goes with it, the education components go with it, the ability to research and redefine goes with it, because you're working on a lower budget. But our costs have gone through the roof. So it's been, it was really like
It's
a
not
license an education in economics
Absolutely.
101.
and it's not just the appetite of the dealers for a rate increase. It's not just, it's the end consumer. It's the customer that has to say, I'm not going to pay double for, the service contract that I bought last time, which was 3 years ago.
Right. And also until it balances, until all the players balance themselves out, it's very hard to be the change leader. And I remember saying in 2020, when this all happened and cars were being sold for $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 more, guys, we need to double our costs of our gap immediately. Because if we don't, in 4 or 5 years, we are going to be eaten alive. Well, guess what happened? Nobody did it, and it is
Actively
out of control.
Actively being eaten alive.
We got eaten alive in gap, but everybody just wants to say, oh, it was lack of oversight, it was lack of management, but really it was the bravery to be the one person to say, I'm not going to do this, and I'll give up my gap sales before I will put myself in a situation that I'm going to lose millions and millions of dollars. I mean, millions of dollars are being lost right now in gap claims.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the time I was running a Chrysler store and buying 2019 Grand Caravan GTs with 30,000 miles for $19,500. COVID hits. A year later, I'm competing with Enterprise and the other rental car companies too. But I'm literally buying those in the lane, 2019 Grand Caravan GTs, not the sexiest of vehicles in 2021 by any stretch, right? With 50,000 miles for $30,000.
Yeah. I remember we sold my son's van back at the time for $3,000 more than he paid for
Absolutely.
it, new. 2 years later, 50,000 miles on it. I mean, it was unbelievable. And I'm like, somebody's going to pay the price for all of this. The consumer paid the price. They paid way too much for their new car. If they had a trade, they got too much for their used. They're buried in their loan. We're buried in gap. I mean, it's not going to end up looking good, and now we're all paying for it, and everybody wants to point fingers, but it was all of our doing.
Correct.
Everybody. And the fact that nobody, especially administrators, didn't stand up and say, guys, worldwide, we need to raise our gap rates now. Mm-hmm. Like, somebody needed to say, we cannot do this. We have to combine together. Otherwise, we're all going to get eaten alive. And for those administrators that fed their gap to other companies, we're like, it's not my pricing, it's theirs. But that's just a very greedy way to look at overall what we're all going through today.
We need your voice in the industry still. So hindsight.
I'm not a popular voice. I wasn't a popular voice when I sat on a panel in 2008 or 9 and said I would reinsure ancillary products. Everybody's like, what are you doing? That's all the money we make. I mean, why would you do that? I'm like, because it's not my money. I am an administrator. My job is to administrate contracts, not to hold back all this money. It's the dealer's money.
The right decisions are always the hardest decisions to make. So keep that voice.
Somebody might shoot me. I'll be on one of those sitcoms. It's like shoot the person that kind of gives all the truth. Yeah.
It's a murder mystery or a true crime scene. Now it's going to be a documentary. No.
I'm sure I've been the target of many dartboards in offices.
Just your picture
Just
on a
picture.
dartboard.
All the great ones are.
That's right.
Coming out of COVID, or things that you said you learned during COVID, be it through digital conversations, via Zoom, Teams, preparing your team through COVID, do you think that strengthened them for how the world is today and the way they're able to operate their businesses within Portfolio's world.
Yeah, well, I think one thing it did is it allowed teams, if your teams are structured properly and you have the right leadership, if you had 3 different offices or maybe 34 different dealerships, you could bring together your managers in a much more efficient way if everybody pays attention. I think that's the biggest thing is on Zoom calls.
Cameras on,
But people aren't paying attention. And I'm guilty. I mean, I get bored and I start reading my email or I do something. But I think that it allowed us to have operational efficiency and better communication rather than waiting for everybody to come together once a month. We could jump on a call. We could have a call in 3 different offices together, or you could have a call with a dealer group or an agency very quickly. But so I like that. But what I think we did also is we leaned way too much the other way and forgot how much the personal touch, the in-person, the water cooler conversations, the reading somebody's face after a tough conversation. Like if you do, I mean, we have a leader in our company that leads a very large group and has never come to 2 of the offices to introduce themselves in person. And when you look at that and they've never touched or seen their brand new manager from a merger, and the people just don't know that person, like to me, that's where we've gone the other way. Like we forget how important it is to value people, to look them in the eye, to have a tough conversation in person so that when you hang up the Zoom call, if you and I have had a tough conversation, I don't know if you're crying, you're laughing, you're pulling up a bottle of beer in the middle of a workday, what is it that you're doing? Because we aren't one-on-one, and I don't have the ability to say, are you okay? Like, I know this was a tough conversation, or sit there or walk by them a little bit later and go, you hanging in there? You doing all right? Because I know we had a tough conversation. Or they get a tough call, like, sometimes agents and dealers aren't so nice to people on the other line. They forget that we're all human, and they don't have anybody to check on them to see that that's okay. So I think we've gone kind of both ways with it. I think technology can be used in the right way if it's not abused, but we also have to remember the limitations that it has on it. And especially in this AI world, the misinterpretations we can have due to maybe doing something automatically, and now we don't have touch with that part of our business, and we don't have a human interaction saying, hey guys, I didn't feel real good about that interaction. You may want to call and check on that person, or the dealer left really upset. You know what I mean? Can somebody follow up and make sure?
And those assumptions aren't always accurate, obviously. So let's talk about the positives of technology. Let's talk about, and you leading the way in some of this with online claims and some of these other areas where technology is revolutionizing this field, this arena. Mm-hmm. And again, to your leadership in that, how did you envision those type of transitions? How did you take the dealer body, the agency body kicking and screaming into that world?
Well, I would say that a lot of them would be like, maybe somebody would, and it was oftentimes the presentation, like if it was presented as like a product that was cheaper and better than the other by the agent or by, how other dealers perceiving it, and nobody ever took the time to go through our value proposition, and we were just installed as another administrator, like a lot of times people didn't understand the value of what they were getting. And even the agents, for that matter, like there were some agents that just never paid attention to like our communication and used it to the ability that they could to be able to say, I actually know what's going on in your business and I can help you. Because it was like warranty forever. If we would have looked at not being able to tie somebody back to the dealership and just made it a pre-auth but never tracked it and never said, this is how many conversions, these are the number of people that left because you wouldn't take their coupon, all of that. Like if we would have just let it be, then technology doesn't pay for itself, right? So when you install a piece of technology, I think the key is what can we do with it more than we're doing with it? What benefits can we take from it and make it bigger and better And it could be the same benefits that everybody has, but nobody's really looked at it and said, look, if I use this and then I feed back to the dealer this information, you know what I mean, based on it, because now I should have more time for analyzation if I'm not the one doing all the work. How can we take that data and make it very valuable for the next team? The same way with, all of our sessions and everything were 100% automated. I mean, there are still companies out there that are hand feeding all this information in. And so, but sometimes when you hand feed information in, you learn, right? So you have to be careful not to go so automated that you're not learning.
That there's a distance.
What is the information being fed, and is there something in here that I should be paying attention to? And I don't know that a lot of operators today in businesses are as adept into looking at their numbers because everything's so automated as they might have been when they were signing every check, right, that's going out the door.
I think that's a maxim for sure. Your servant leadership, the way that you've thrived, more than survived, revolutionized this industry to a large extent, you're amazing. And I thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
And Dale, I'll let you close it out and ask any questions, or Kelly, you want to impart
the
anything?
The legacy that she leaves bleeds into industries far beyond hers. I mean, she's impacted my life, which then I get to share with guys in dealerships, my children, like the way I live my life. It's all, you're a huge inspiration. So thank you.
I give it all to God.
And I can see it in your eyes, and I believe exactly that. Thank you for coming on the Car Bar.
Thanks
Kelly,
for having
thank you
me.
so much.